Chapter 297, Year. That night, Neville had a nightmare for the first time in ages. Since he'd started morning exercises with Ted and later practiced breathing techniques and the holy light, his dreams had been peaceful. But that night, the scar on his forehead pulsed and a familiar dread returned. In the dream, Lord Voldemort had been reduced to a head and a wisp of Dementor smoke, possessing a rabbit deep in a mountain forest, only to be seized by a terrifying, grotesque, ghostly hand, all bone spurs and membranes. Neville woke with a gasp, comforted by Ron's steady snoring and the knowledge that he was still in the dormitory. Still, the scar's faint throb made him uneasy. Every time it reacted, it had been connected to Voldemort. The next morning, he told Ted about the dream. After listening, Ted sought out Dumbledore. "Professor Dumbledore," Ted said, "Neville dreamed Voldemort's remnant soul was captured by a ghostly hand." Dumbledore's expression sharpened. "What kind of ghostly hand?" Ted raised his hand. With Neville's permission, he drew a psionic echo from the boy's memory and formed its image in the air. When Dumbledore saw it, his face went grave. "A centipede may be dead, but it never lies down," he murmured. Meanwhile, the castle buzzed with end-of-term distractions. Ravenclaw's wizard card market was booming, and the campus was full of students glued to countless games. In one popular RPG, Giant Kingdom, players shrank to the size of a finger, scurrying through a world of giants and hazards. They relied on gadgets and teamwork to survive, and on luck to avoid other players' schemes. "Found a treasure chest," someone cried. "Oh no, mimic! It's a mimic! Duck! Finally a merchant! It's Meow Meow! She's got great stuff, but it's expensive. I heard Meow Meow's combat stats are low. Just take the goods without paying. Wow, a free ride. It's over. We got taken down. No free ride." The chat erupted. Meow Meow's NPC declared, "I, a little cat, am no pushover," and the audience went wild. In the even more competitive Magic League, Ted's team swept through levels and crushed bosses. In the final round, Ted pulled off a startling combo, apparition plus mirror image chain lightning, and instantly wiped out his opponent. Kids argued that Ted, as the game's development lead, knew the mechanics too well. It wasn't fair. They voted, playfully but seriously, to kick him from the top-tier matches. Fortunately for Ted, teams of 6 could still play, so his crew stuck together. In one match, opponents went after the support player Neville, tired of his late-game gardening, planting mushrooms and turf that somehow always got stepped on at exactly the right moment. Frustrated and humiliated, they decided Neville had to die in the match. Facing 3 enemies closing in, Neville gave up pretending to be a passive support. "I was going to play a wizard," he declared, "but you dragged me into close quarters. I'm done pretending. I'm a warrior now." He launched into a berserker assault, shouting nonsensical battle cries, "Take this sword! White Emperor Holy Sword, Demacia!" And the others, stunned by his unexpected ferocity, were routed. "He's too strong," some cried. "Neville's the fiercest," others admitted. "We were tricked." Quidditch season ended while the S1 tournaments were still winding down. Gryffindor scraped by Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff to reach the finals, where they faced Slytherin and Malfoy. Slytherin had toned things down a bit. Malfoy wasn't the brat he'd been, but Gryffindor wasn't quite strong enough and lost in the final. Slytherin's win streak continued. No one could remember how many championships in a row that made. The old cat lady almost fell off the stands in her disappointment. On the last day of term, the S1 games wrapped up. Ted handed out prizes to the top 3 in each category, practical and desirable items, especially the realistic pets. They looked and felt almost alive, the same appearance, the same habits, only you couldn't actually feed them, but they developed personalities through long-term interaction. Owners could sync magic with them to maintain and play, and the pets had strong nurturing attributes. They were addictive. At the semester party, dozens of realistic pets scampered and flew about, while others argued over hotspot double-sided mirrors, devices that let you access ideal land during vacation. Most kids could only afford one or the other. Ted sang again that night, this time 500 miles, and several little wizards felt a sudden pang of homesickness. Fortunately, they were going home tomorrow. On the Hogwarts Express the next morning, everyone chattered excitedly about returning to their families. In the carriage, Hermione leaned toward Ted. "You remember what I told you, right?" she asked. Ted grinned. "Of course. Once I'm settled, I'll come visit. You'd better treat me well." Hermione smiled and looked out the window as the train rocked toward home. Around them, their companions dozed. The fledgling dragon Anna cuddled her teething stick. Ansu tucked her head under her wing. Many of the events from the original story hadn't happened this year. No Buckbeak incident, no public trial. Malfoy had matured, and the dreadful Dementor invasion never reached the school. After all, the Dementors hadn't been sent. They'd been harvested by Ted and used as material for other things. He'd even given Jerry a small pet, a semi-corporeal creature cobbled from Dementor phantoms and fear essence, something like a ghost terrifier. Ted leaned back and opened his character panel. He'd made huge strides this year, not just leveling up, but his whole body entering a rapid development phase. His attributes had jumped forward. Ted Epiphany level, 8th level wizard, 8th level mind mage. Experience pool, 51,296 attributes, strength 7, plus 1 wristband, constitution 8, plus 2 philosopher's stone, agility 7, plus 1 spiderwalk boots, intelligence 9, plus 2 spirit crystal servant, perception 9, plus wand, plus 2 spirit crystal servant, plus 1 dazzling ring, spirit 18, plus 2 philosopher's stone, 3 spirit crystal servant, charisma 9, luck, reputation, talents, otherworld knowledge, gold, study god, purple, voice of heartbeat, red, mist of destiny, red, unequal exchange, orange, mind resonance, purple. Skills, magic, 7th level, plus 2 philosopher's stone, magic resistance, 4th level, magic penetration, 2nd level, spellcasting, 6th level, plus 1 wand, mind power level, mental resistance, 5th level, transfiguration, 6th level, potions, 5th level, prophecy, 3rd level, herbology, 4th level, dark arts, 6th level, magical creatures, 6th level, bloodline modification, 7th level, ancient runes, 4th level, alchemy, 4th level, plus 1 philosopher's stone, magic, psionics, pets, Ansu, Annie, Softy, Cabbage, Chicken Bro, Rat Brother. The numbers and skills looked impressive, luxurious even. Ted's experience was enough for another level up, and the development of Ideal Land had been the decisive factor. In raw attributes, he was already approaching minor superhuman territory. In the Marvel universe, he thought, I could probably take on Kick-Ass. His biggest surprise was bloodline modification at level 7. He'd created so many magical creatures this year, from modifying Softy to crafting the Dementor smoke pet, that he'd practically become a magical creature specialist. He closed the panel and let the train lull him toward sleep, the end of the year folding away behind him and a new one waiting just ahead. 302, Hotel California, Leaky Cauldron Edition. Chapter 2, Leaky Cauldron Edition. Ted had returned to his little house off Diagon Alley. He no longer needed to sleep at the Leaky Cauldron. He'd bought a modest place tucked away behind the pub, and then, of course, expanded it. Expansion illegal? No, he'd gotten ministry permission for the undetectable extension charm. That was old business. He'd applied for the permission himself. Why shouldn't he use it? The house was spotless thanks to Dobby the house elf, who tidied constantly. Ted put his luggage down and flopped onto the bed for a moment, unsure what to do next. First things first, update my status. He took out his two-way mirror and logged into the temporary forum he'd put together, Ideal Land. It had been rushed before the holidays and was crude, basically a big social space with a trending list and forums, but it worked. He changed his status to back at my little nest, not sure what to do, and attached a GIF. I finally expanded my little house to a few hundred square meters. Should I show it off? He thought, grinning. The Weasleys hadn't arrived yet. Hermione was still in her father's car. The two-way mirror looked like an ordinary small mirror, so Hermione carrying it around to go online didn't seem strange, something Mr. Granger found a little odd. He was amused and a little proud. His daughter was growing up, getting more fashion-conscious and taking care of herself. Hermione would be glad when she saw Ted later. She was particular about being on time. That first night of the holidays, Ted had dinner at the second-hand home and started sorting through accumulated tasks. He checked the storeroom for salvageable items and scanned Dobby's notepad for errands. On the forum, users were clamoring for more sources of magic movies, romance and action films, no less. They want romance action films? Fine. But I can't just hand everything out. He typed a blunt reply explaining that he could point people to possible channels, but if they wanted content, they'd have to dig it up themselves. Wizards sharing experiences on the forum had somehow drawn unprecedented traffic to the Dutch Ministry of Magic's servers, everyone trying to broaden their horizons. That wasn't his intention, but the forum had clearly hit a nerve. People complained that a bulletin board format was inconvenient and too slow for feedback, that it hid good past posts, and they wanted a real two-way mirror network. All right, he thought. People were paying attention to his every move now. There was no point hiding that he was building Ideal Land and a magic network prototype at school. It would be noticed. Still, a magic network wasn't a simple thing. Its core would be mind power and required at least level 7. No one else could really use it. That meant it would be exclusive and more secure than any patent. If people wanted to play, they'd have to play on his terms. Free? That's the most expensive option. He made a to-do note. Within a week, connect the second-hand home to the network and test listing, auction, and forum services first. Magic movies didn't need formal review, but too many sources could strain the Magic Network's server. Bandwidth wouldn't be an issue. Great Britain only had about 30,000 wizards. Even if everyone logged in at once, his mind power could handle a denial of service. What worried him more was storage and processing. He couldn't always leave those to his own power. He needed a main server. Buy 10 tons of crystals from the Muggle world and refine a server. Early the next morning, the Weasley twins came down the fire, Fred and George in their usual boisterous mood. "Ted, we're here." "Since you're here, let's get to work," Ted said, waving them over. "That's your spot." He'd set them up with a small stall in the second-hand home's play area, 2 counters, 2 shelves, where they could sell prank items and novelty sweets. They were about to graduate and didn't fancy ministry exams. Starting their own business suited them better. They'd tried it the previous year, and it had gone well, so this holiday was for market research and refining their products. If all went well, next year they'd open a proper shop. After breakfast, Ted went to the Leaky Cauldron for an appointment. One of the 3 most famous pubs in the wizarding world, the Leaky Cauldron was a constant hub of comings and goings. By a little after 9, 4 or 5 tables were already taken. One of Ted's classmates, Hannah Abbott, the granddaughter of Old Tom, was there, and she lit up when she saw him. Hannah was the same age as Ted and had watched his meteoric rise from singing the school anthem at the sorting ceremony to whatever he'd become now. She babbled excitedly to her grandfather, "If Ted doesn't sing during the holidays, everyone feels like they missed out." Old Tom only pretended to be stern. "You've eaten and lodged here 2 years on my account. Are you not going to show any appreciation? Come on then, sing us a tune. Let me hear what heavenly music you make." Ted smiled and pulled out his old guitar. It looked worn, but it was one of those alchemy-crafted instruments. He plucked a few notes and launched into a long, beautiful intro. The music quieted the chatter in the room. Cups were forgotten mid-raise, people lingered in their chairs, and those who had been getting up paused to listen. The guitar seemed to draw everyone inward, carrying their thoughts away on the melody. He sang, his deep voice winding through the bar. "Walking down dim Diagon Alley, cool wind blows my hair, butterbeer drifts heavy through the air. Lights twinkle far ahead, my head feels light, my sight grows dim. I need somewhere to rest tonight. There's a man at the doorway, calling me in. I hear distant bells. I whisper to myself, this could be heaven or this could be hell. Then he lights a candle and shows the way for me. Voices echo down the corridor, and I think I hear them say, 'Welcome to the Leaky Cauldron. Such a lovely place. Plenty of old faces. Such a friendly space. At the Leaky Cauldron, you'll find rooms any time you need.' He stands behind the counter wiping glasses and calls the strangers friends. They dance in the hall beneath the summer heat. Some nights become memories. Some will have to leave." He finished with a little flourish and grinned. "Hotel California, Leaky Cauldron Edition," he announced, bowing. The song became a fixture at the pub. Old Tom recorded it on a charm and played it often, and soon nearly every customer could sing along. Ted was waiting for Sirius and Lupin to arrive. Lupin's teaching term had ended, but their werewolf project was only halfway done. There were things Ted couldn't try at school, so the holidays were the time to see whether his human alchemy ideas were working. if he could separate the werewolf affliction from the human body, but he wasn't about to experiment on Lupin. Woeful werewolves? Catching and experimenting on one would be inhumane, and once he went down that path, there was no turning back. Even Lupin probably wouldn't agree. Ted preferred to keep options open. After talking things over with Sirius and the others, Sirius, generous as ever, offered a magical mansion for Ted to set up a laboratory. Ted also told Lupin he planned to buy some materials in the Muggle world. Lupin agreed. With the arrangements in place, Ted left the leaky cauldron and headed to Hermione's house to stay as a guest. If he was late, she'd be annoyed. Thanks to reader Seya Lawson and Turuten for the 1,000-point reward. Thanks to reader Yu Sen for the 100-point reward. I'm going back to my hometown tomorrow for a celebration banquet, so I won't be able to update then. 303. The sky is cracked. The changes the magical network had brought to the wizarding world were enormous. Because wizards had been so isolated from the Muggle world, most of them had no idea how much Muggle society had changed. Even the Muggle studies textbooks were 80 years out of date. They didn't know what a telephone was for, let alone have access to the internet. And yet, through Ted's two-way mirror hotspot, wizards were already making video calls across Great Britain. They could even connect to the internet and play games. Mr. Granger was stunned when he saw the little mirror Hermione always carried and everything it could do. He was a dentist and so had more exposure to modern technology than most wizards, but he never expected them to have reached this level. London had opened its first internet cafe only that year, and it couldn't compare. Hermione kept repeating that this was something Ted and a group of young wizards had created, that it could let hundreds of people meet and play together anywhere in Britain. If a group of adult wizards gathered using it, wouldn't they rule the world? Hermione laughed as she explained the Minister of Magic to her father. Mr. Granger only smiled faintly when she finished. Sounds like the minister still acts like a cabinet man, he observed. From what you've described, this fudge comes across as a civil servant straight out of Yes, Prime Minister. After all, the British knew how to parody themselves. The TV show had started in 1986. Ted told Hermione he had arrived, and the Grangers waited for him at the garden gate. When he stepped out of a taxi carrying a small box, Mr. Granger's expression betrayed his surprise. I thought you'd appear with a whoosh or ride in on a broomstick, he said. Or, by the way, Mr. Weasley's flying car is pretty good too. Ted grinned. I could have appeared, but to avoid causing a fuss, I took a taxi. Besides, I can chat with the driver about the weather in London. Mr. Granger laughed and clapped Ted on the shoulder and noticed how tall he'd grown. Ted added, The flying car's been found, by the way. I can't drive it, though. According to regulations, Mr. Weasley wrote himself, you can legally build it, but driving it is illegal. The joke broke any remaining awkwardness. Whether Muggle or wizard, they were British through and through. Mrs. Granger set a generous table and made a batch of fruit mince dumplings to welcome Ted. She apologized sheepishly. The dumplings had become unexpectedly popular. After the couple mentioned them on TV, they were asked to explain the recipe, but they couldn't say a wizard had shown them. So Mrs. Granger claimed the idea as her own. Ted took it in stride. He even taught her a few Hogwarts recipes humans could manage at home. He promised to help find magical flower seeds for the garden. If he couldn't, he'd get Neville to cultivate some new varieties. Ted stayed 3 days, touring around with the Grangers, cooking and eating together, and enjoying himself before he left. Back in the laboratory, Ted continued his work, separating the magic that produced lycanthropy. The discovery that an animagus's active animal form could be immune to werewolf infection was an important clue. The previous generation of Hogwarts friends had used that to confront Lupin every full moon. Old James would become a stag and push Lupin against the wall, while Sirius, as a black dog, bit at his legs, and Peter, as a rat, shrieked from the corner. They turned the Shrieking Shack into their monthly battleground. If Lupin had been an animagus too, who knew how things might have changed? For the research, Lupin was trying to strip himself of as much modern influence as possible. No exotic foods, no conveniences, so Ted could analyze the most primitive form of werewolf magic. Hunger, Ted discovered, intensified his wolfish reactions. Lupin had spent the years since graduation comfortably enough that he'd rarely been truly hungry. He hadn't realized how much hunger could accelerate the change. Left hungry and near the edge of rationality, Lupin began sneaking food whenever he could. He tore open and devoured several cans of dog food Ted had bought for the lab's animals. The brand was surprisingly good. Every creature liked it, from Ansu to Annie, from Softy to Rat Brother, so Lupin polished off over 20 cans. Sirius arrived, set down a box of his own, and sniffed the air. "What are you eating that smells so good? Where did you buy it? What brand?" he asked. "Muggle-made stuff's better than what my house elf makes." Ted looked at them both, and at the empty cans. He didn't tell them the whole truth. This was a professional experiment. A few cans of dog food wouldn't hurt. When he wasn't being studied, Lupin ran the detective agency and often helped the police as a consultant. Tonks came by to assist and seemed to be firmly attached to Lupin. Her hair was pink now. One afternoon, Ted dropped in and found Lupin staring at a pile of worried papers. "What's up?" Ted asked. "Another perverted murderer in London." Lupin shook his head. "Mysterious incidents have increased this year. Look at this boy." He slid a photograph to Ted, a thin child who had had his left leg amputated. "His left leg was amputated a year ago," Lupin explained. "Now he says he's constantly being bitten by thousands of insects in that missing leg. He can't sleep." It was phantom limb pain, but nothing conventional. Medication, psychotherapy, and physical treatments had failed. The boy had become emaciated from the torment. His desperate parents had come to Lupin because of his reputation for handling strange cases. Ted examined the photograph and sensed something odd, a faint, almost imperceptible psychic connection over the boy's crown. This felt like psionic energy, someone with an unusually sensitive awareness. "I'll go see him," Ted said. The parents were skeptical that a young man could help, but they let him try. Ted could feel the boy's agony was real and not an illusion. It was a psionic disturbance anchored to the missing limb. He asked the father where they'd put the leg. "Buried under the tree in the backyard," the father said. Ted dug under the tree and soon uncovered a rotting wooden box in a pit over a meter deep. Inside lay a half leg already reduced to bleached bone, crawling with ants. The boy's sensation of being bitten by multitudes of insects was literal. The severed limb had become an ant nest, an active source of stimulus in the boy's non-material perception. They burned the remains to ash and scattered them into the river. The immediate cause of the phantom pain was removed. "How old will Chris be?" Ted asked. 11 in 2 weeks, the father said. "Good," Ted said. "The problem's solved. I should be going." "How much do we owe you?" "No charge." Ted smiled. "Perhaps we'll meet again someday." Walking home, Ted thought about the case. Logically, Chris shouldn't have had such acute perception, but here was a clear example of psionic energy overflowing the body and connecting back to detached matter. Many phenomena hint that out-of-body or non-material awareness can feel sensations endured by the physical body, hot and cold, pressure, pain. Matter to non-material medium, then to spirit. It was a continuous spectrum. There were many non-material media. Psionic energy was one, magic another, and other mysterious forces existed too. Ancient rituals and bloody sacrifices had often been means to reach into that non-material realm, to solicit information or revelation from the spirit world. The offerings in those rituals were not just physical goods, but surges of emotion. If, in a colony of ants, the queen's pull could be seen as an emotional fluctuation shaping a non-material biofield, then it becomes plausible that a collective spirit could arise from the converging minds of many individuals. A collective spirit could be so powerful it affected the material world. Large-scale emotional resonance could change reality itself, and those changes might leave no clear proof, appearing instead as odd discrepancies in memory and history, like the Mandela effect. Every civilization had once believed in sacrificial rites. The ones that survived had endured horrendous struggles to uproot those beliefs and make people forget them. The world was changing in other ways too. That night, Ted had a rare dream. Countless cracks appeared in the sky. Chapter 304, Request for Leave. I mentioned in yesterday's chapter that I would be taking a short leave, but many readers must have missed it. My child is moving up to the next level of schooling today, so I returned to my hometown yesterday afternoon. I won't be able to post an update today. I apologize to everyone. 305. Dumbledore's Letter of Introduction. Ted had a dream, an unpleasant one. Wizards like him did not dream easily. He was already one of the few masters of mind power. A dream for him was more like a premonition, an omen. But there was nothing to be done about it, like knowing winter was coming, except for preparing more, you could not stop it. Ted wondered whether he should promote the ideal land game more, expand other entertainment projects, harvest more experience points. Still, a few days later, something good happened. Dumbledore sent him a letter of introduction to an old friend. Ted arrived in Ivry, a southeastern suburb of Paris known for its wine, carrying the letter and a badge. Dumbledore's old friend lived there. Ted unfolded the letter again and frowned at a line. In the original story, Nicholas Flamel and his wife lived in seclusion in Devon, but Dumbledore wouldn't lie to me, would he? He was right. The old friend was Nicholas Flamel. 3 years earlier, the year Ted and his friends started at school, Flamel, who had befriended Dumbledore in his youth and helped him against Grindelwald, wrote to say he no longer wished to live. Eternal life, he said, was a false promise, a perpetual motion machine with limits. How long is forever? How far is forever? The Flamel couple had lived over 600 years by refining the Philosopher's Stone into the elixir of life, but their magic was waning and their vitality flickering. Their senses and emotions were retreating. Life had become suffering. They decided a dignified death was preferable to clinging on. The main problem was the inheritance of the Philosopher's Stone. Flamel wanted Dumbledore to take the stone, live a few more centuries, and then die when he no longer wished to live. Dumbledore, for his part, was strangely open-minded about it. In his youth, Dumbledore's arrogance and inexperience had cost him dearly. He lost a lover, a sister, a mother driven to worry, and a father who pursued revenge. He'd gained his brother's hatred. His nephew had also died in the Grindelwald affair. He had, for a time, wished for death himself. But one thing had not been finished. His student Tom would surely be interested in the stone. So Dumbledore staged a test. He spread the rumor that Flamel had given the stone to Dumbledore and that it was secured in a Gringotts vault. His student's response confirmed everything. Then came the events of Ted's first year. Now the Flamels were nearing the end of their lives, and Dumbledore, for reasons of his own, wrote to his old friend asking him to guide a young man in his final days. Perhaps Dumbledore realized that, brilliant as he was not naturally the kind of teacher who could reach certain students' hearts. He wanted the words of a dying man to do what he himself could not. Whatever his motives, Ted had to make the trip. This was Nicholas Flamel, the last surviving legendary alchemist. If Ted missed this, it might truly be his last chance. He bought a bouquet and a bottle of good red wine, and using the badge, found the address. A wizard's location in the Muggle world was usually hidden by enchantments, and a legendary alchemist like Flamel would have many concealing spells, charms akin to the Fidelius. The badge Dumbledore had given him was clearly a token of access. Following Dumbledore's directions, Ted summoned an archway of roses in an open space by the river. Passing through, he came to the gate of a small garden. Ted had checked that open space a dozen times before with various methods and found nothing. It was remarkable. He pressed the badge to the iron gate, and it opened on its own. Birdsong drifted on the air, flowers gave off their scent, and not far ahead a small fountain tinkled beneath the figure of a maiden pouring water from a bottle. An old man and woman, thin and frail, but supporting each other, came to the gate and smiled as they greeted him. "You must be Ted Epiphany? Dumbledore has told me about you. His evaluation is higher than I expected," Nicholas Flamel said. Dumbledore had written in his note, "I don't want him to become another Gellert." Despite their age, the Flamels seemed to have bright spirits. Since they'd stopped taking the elixir, their bodies had grown weaker, but their minds were steadier. "Good day, Mr. Nicholas Flamel, Mrs. Flamel. Call me Ted," he replied. Ted's fluent French surprised them. The couple had plenty of time in their long lives to learn many languages. Ted, finding language study too easy, had only picked some up in his spare time. "Dumbledore told me much about you. Welcome. Let us hope my last days don't disappoint you," Nicholas said. Ted stayed with the Flamels and began to learn alchemy. 600 years of accumulated knowledge was unmatched. He studied with devout focus, pouring everything he had into it. His rate of learning astonished Nicholas Flamel. At first, the old man had wondered why Dumbledore praised this student so highly and had worried. Now he understood. If Flamel's weakening body hadn't limited instruction to 30 minutes a day, Ted would have absorbed even more. Even with that constraint, in 4 days, Ted's alchemy level rose again. Alchemy level 5, +1 Philosopher's Stone level. That leap shortened Ted's research and experimentation time enormously. It was a breakthrough he hadn't achieved after half a school year of hard work. That was the difference a master teacher makes. Nicholas helped Ted finalize the design of a magical power source and praised the overall plan as creative, though rough in detail. In terms of magical industrial intelligence, the project wasn't impossible. Alchemists had always strived to challenge the realm of the divine, extend life beyond natural limits, alter matter's composition and texture, create life. Some alchemists had made homunculi in bottles, magical organisms, or fungi. The records were unclear. Others built magical puppets, trying to reproduce in their image what Christian myth called a soul. While fully turning inorganic matter into flesh remained elusive, there was extensive research into making inanimate objects exhibit thought. Even the Weasley family's old flying car had, to some degree, its own spirit. Elemental spirits occasionally arose naturally in the magical world. When alchemists formed anthropomorphic magical constructs, they could be astonishingly lifelike. Conversation and touch could not always tell them from a true person. They nearly simulated an independent personality. Not quite the kind that would start asking existential questions like, where do I come from and where am I going? Or where can I get some fries? Ted did not need that level of sophistication. He only wanted a simple, low-configuration, magical industrial intelligence. Nicholas gave him a method to cultivate independent entities, laborious and time-consuming. It offered little control over the personalities produced, but it was effective. Flamel had created, invented, and gathered more knowledge than most wizards could imagine. Potion recipes, alchemical reaction equations, magical tool manufacturing processes, even information on goblin secrets. It was like a hidden vault of ancient manuals. Ted, a genius with a near photographic memory, copied everything he could at a glance. But in the space of half a month, the Flamel couple visibly weakened. They grew even thinner, and Ted had taken over most of the household tasks. Mrs. Flamel was genuinely overwhelmed. One evening, Ted felt restless and could not calm himself. He had a vague, hollow certainty that the time had come. Thanks to user rewritten for the 1,000-point reward. Thanks to user Zorstherinsung for the 100-point reward. 306. The Resurrection of Voldemort. When Ted found the Flamels, the old couple had already dressed in the splendid clothes they had prepared. They sat at the table, savoring the bottle of red wine Ted had brought. Dumbledore said you have some talent for prophecy, Nicholas Flamel murmured. His voice was weak, his breath uneven. It seems that's true. Yes, our time has come. Ted stood in silence for a moment, at a loss for words. Don't be sad, Flamel's wife said, lifting her cup with effort. We are very happy. We will move on. Don't worry about our leaving. A minute later, the two 600-year-old alchemists stopped breathing. Ted carried them to the bed, sent Ansu to fetch Dumbledore, and waited. As their only remaining friends, Dumbledore and Ted should see them off. On July 7th, after 6 centuries of storms and triumphs, Nicholas and Perenelle Flamel passed into eternal rest. Dumbledore presided over the small, private funeral. Only Ted attended. According to Flamel's will, anything of interest was to be taken, and the rest would remain with them. In truth, Flamel had already dispersed his vast estate 2 years earlier. Shares in Beauxbatons and other holdings had been given away, and there was nothing truly precious left in the house. Still, rumors of the Philosopher's Stone's existence made the matter sensitive, so the funeral was kept quiet. The Flamels likely cared little for posthumous honors. They were buried in that secluded garden where Dumbledore had sealed the last magics. No one would be able to find the place again, not even Dumbledore or Ted. Let them rest in peace. The two stood by the river for a long time afterward. Ted felt a genuine sadness. the Flamels had been kind and generous. With Nicholas's help, Ted's alchemy had rapidly advanced to level 6, and Perenelle had treated him like family. Even knowing they had chosen this tranquil end, he still found it hard to let go. "Any plans for the holiday?" Dumbledore asked at last. Ted thought for a moment. "I'll rest for a bit, then contact my friends. They've been trying to get me to the Quidditch World Cup finals. I thought I wouldn't have the time." Before he could finish, the ground under their feet trembled. Ted straightened, alarmed by the sudden vibration, expecting some problem with the seals. But the quake did not come from the Flamel tomb. It came from deep beneath the earth. 2 weeks earlier, less than a week after Ted had arrived in Paris, 3 figures had come to the city. Calling them 3 individuals wasn't quite right. The one leading them was no longer fully human. He was an undead wizard, a master of death and demoncraft, Ryan, an otherworldly sorcerer. To stay safe, Ryan had once hidden his heart away. That strange, cautious step had saved his life. Though his body could not be fully restored, he was alive enough to carry on. It was only a matter of time. The second was Lord Voldemort, pale, gaunt, skeletal, faceless. How he had returned and how he had come to be allied with Ryan was a tangled story that led to the third companion, Barty Crouch Jr. Barty's history was already notorious. At his trial, he raved that his master would return, and his father, Bartemius Crouch Sr., then head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, declared he would be punished without mercy. The affair ruined Crouch Sr.'s political ambitions, and his wife fell fatally ill under the strain. Her final wish was to see her son freed. Unable to bear her plea, Crouch Sr. secretly swapped his sick wife into Azkaban with Polyjuice Potion. The prisoner who died in the cell 3 days later was not the real Barty Jr. From then on, the true Barty Crouch Jr. was kept at home, controlled by Imperius and hidden away. In late May, the Quidditch World Cup knockouts began, and under the pleading of his house elf Winky, Crouch Sr. agreed, despite his son's sheltered life, to allow Barty Jr. to attend the tournament to clear his head. On the way home after a match, Barty Crouch Jr. overpowered Winky and fled. He proved himself resourceful. He acquired an illegal wand, began asking questions, and as heir to the pure-blood Crouch secrets, quickly learned of the mysterious events that had been covered up. His first thought was that his master had returned. He followed whatever clues he could and made his way to Rome. Ryan, who had been hiding under the church's nose, was bold and cunning. Barty came to test him and to see whether this mysterious man could lead him back to his master. In Rome, Ryan's ambitions did not impress Barty. The wizard thought the other was a mere mortal in strange shape, someone to be avoided. But Barty was determined. He still had to serve his master. When Ryan captured Barty, the younger man quickly switched tactics. He lied, flattered, and persuaded Ryan that he could find a much more powerful master to aid Ryan in ruling the world. Coincidentally, Albania, where Voldemort's remnant spirit hid, lay across the sea from Italy. Barty led Ryan to it. Neville later dreamt of the scene, a remnant of Voldemort's soul, wrenched and desperate, being seized by a ghostly hand. Ryan held that remnant up and sneered. "This is your powerful master? Barely surviving by possessing a rabbit?" he spat. The ghostly hand squeezed Voldemort's fragment. Ryan looked with contempt at the young wizard who had once seemed promising. Barty, too, was taken aback. His master, this was truly Voldemort, but how had 10 years of defeat reduced him so? Barty forced an explanation. "My master has unusual magic. He cannot truly be killed." Ryan inspected the fragment with cold disdain. "I hope you can be of use. If not, you'll learn that even in this state you are not unkillable." Using Barty Crouch Jr.'s knowledge and some advanced dark arts, they performed a resurrection. Voldemort returned, though he felt inferior to Ryan's power and was immediately wary of the undead wizard's ability to command death. He restrained his hostility and pretended to cooperate. Barty watched this uneasy alliance with worry. He needed his master free of any rival, but acting alone would be suicidal. It would be better to arrange for someone else to do the dirty work. After days of thought and a scrap of gossip, an idea finally came to him. Half a month ago, the 3 slipped into Paris's underground and set events in motion, an action that had caused the small tremor now felt above. Volume 3, End. Chapter 302, Yesterday Once More. Just a few days earlier, Barty, one of the three notorious wizards prowling the Muggle world in Europe, had overheard a young Muggle bragging to his friends about an upcoming excursion to the great cemetery beneath Paris. The kid had been spouting nonsense, foam practically at his lips, but Barty recognized the kernel of something valuable. He slipped the imperious curse into the boy's mind and extracted what he needed. The boy had only heard it secondhand. The whole thing had sounded like bravado. Still, Barty, young and adaptable, fit into Muggle society far more naturally than either Lord Voldemort or Ryan, who both seemed less and less human. Once he'd blended in, he found a library and began to research the so-called Great Cemetery. One thing the braggart had said was true. There were millions of skeletons down there. Europe had suffered repeated plagues, most infamously the Black Death, and cities like Paris and London had never been especially sanitary. Centuries ago, people relieved themselves in the streets. Fashion developed around avoiding filth, high heels so women wouldn't step in waste, wide-brimmed hats to avoid whatever fell from above. At one point, the refuse piled outside Paris was said to be as high as the city walls. With conditions like that, epidemic was inevitable. By 1786, a new plague had pushed the city's cemeteries beyond capacity. Graves overlapped and collapsed into each other. Mass burials became the only option. The French king solved the problem by moving all the bones out of sight to abandoned quarries a dozen miles outside the city, the very stone that had been used to build Notre Dame and Versailles. These old mines became an enormous ossuary. Bones transferred from every cemetery were laid to rest there, and the place continued to receive remains until about 1814. Only in the past century had the city expanded to cover those burial grounds, and a number of streets, especially south of the Seine, now sat directly over the subterranean labyrinth. There were even collapses. To prevent a catastrophe, the government created a geological department to inspect and maintain the tunnels. The official count was around 6 million skeletons. That summer, Paris had even opened 1.6 kilometers of the catacombs to visitors. There was a chapel called the Ossuary, whose walls were literally built from femurs and skulls. When Barty confirmed all this, a light bulb went off in his head. He had found a way to get rid of Ryan, to avenge his master and eliminate a growing threat. He'd seen Ryan's methods. His ability to raise the dead was terrifying. As one of the more capable members of the British magical community, Barty knew something about necromancy. There had always been rumors, ancient African and South American traditions that could twitch corpses, but were primitive. A half-blood wizard a century ago who, taking inspiration from nascent Muggle science, had reanimated a corpse in something like Frankenstein's manor, an act that had provoked outrage and a wanted notice from the International Confederation of Wizards. That technique had been stamped out. But Ryan's power was different, large-scale, efficient, able to create potent undead with special abilities, all obedient to him like insects to the queen. Even Voldemort hesitated to confront him. Barty, who had once thought his master untouchable, felt uneasy. From that unease came a ruthless plan: set two predators on one another and kill with a borrowed knife. Barty leaked the story of the 6 million skeletons beneath Paris to Ryan. Someone who could raise the dead immediately took notice. After questioning sources in detail, Ryan decided to go to Paris, and he took 2 of his lieutenants with him. While Ted was studying with Nicolas Flamel, the 3 of them found a group of local free-spirited youths and, using Imperio, took control of them and led them underground. The French, Barty thought with a mixture of disgust and amusement, could be perversely curious. You would think an enormous underground ossuary would repel people. Instead, a crowd of rebellious kids treated it like an adventure playground. The tunnels were a riot of graffiti, art made from detritus, and even hidden hangouts. Impromptu music parties were not uncommon. At first, the explorers assumed Ryan and his companions were in costume. They laughed, posed for photos, offered joints. Ryan's reaction was quick and merciless. None of them were spared. He turned the living into the undead. If you like parties, he seemed to say, you'll be the zombie dance king. If you like weed, you can be the marijuana zombie king. One by one, they became part of his army. Deeper down, on the lowest levels, the tunnels became an altar of bone, withered yellow remains scattered on the floor, walls stacked neatly with skulls and femurs for tens of meters up to the ceilings. Even degraded fragments held value to Ryan. He set to work harvesting and shaping them. At the same time, Ted was reaching out to Dumbledore and preparing a funeral for Nicholas Flamel and his wife. Ryan and his allies began a ritual that would take 3 days. As Ted and Dumbledore talked by the river, deep beneath Paris, a vast field of skulls began to blaze with an eerie blue flame. The city shivered. The first tremor hit in the afternoon. Spasmodic quakes kept pulsing through the ground all the way into the night. People stayed out in the streets, convinced the authorities were hiding some experiment. Crowds bred chaos. Restless youths, masked figures, hooded drifters, bikers, and firework enthusiasts surged together. Shops were looted, handbags snatched, some dared even to streak through the avenues. As the French proverb might have it, if you say there's no robbery, you don't know France. Human mischief multiplied faster than the earthquakes. Police and firefighters, even mounted units, were mobilized, a spectacle of horses and uniforms, but there were too many onlookers. With the quakes continuing, no one wanted to be indoors. The streets filled, and the city became a muddle of people and panic. The magical community couldn't ignore the tremors either. The two worlds are intertwined. The Muggle governments had contacts with the magical authorities. Was this tremor magical? The French Ministry of Magic sent investigators and issued denials. No, nothing to do with us, until the investigators returned stunned. The magical readings underground were off the charts, almost comparable to controlled nuclear fusion. Someone was doing something big. Muggle seismologists pointed to an epicenter 100 meters below Paris. Newspaper columnists blamed the tour opening. Had messing with the catacombs angered restless spirits? Ministry officials argued the tourist development had destabilized the tunnels, and they were about to collapse. In short, experts bickered, politicians argued, and old patterns repeated. When the state needed answers, it split into factions, each trying to assert its version of events. Before their arguments resolved, the quakes intensified. Ryan's casually resurrected army, following habits from their past lives, stumbled out through hidden exits into the city. At first, the occupiers of the tunnels thought it some new kind of masquerade. "Dude, your costume is awesome. Can I get a picture?" one of the partygoers gushed. A zombie leaned in obligingly, and no one had ever been so close. It opened its jaws and tore half the person's face away. Screams cut through the night. How lively the city was. From above, an observer would have seen the so-called City of Romance turned inside out, demons dancing down every avenue, streets teeming with violent, uncanny life. 308. He can also assemble it. That evening, when Ted and Dumbledore noticed the tremors that kept running through Paris, they both knew something was wrong. Still, this was France. Two Englishmen, one old and one young, had no right to demand things here. The French Ministry of Magic would have every reason to throw them out. At first, neither of them thought it would be anything serious. By nightfall, the magical disturbances beneath the city had grown terrifying. Even some ordinary people with strong natural perception felt a chill running from their feet straight to the back of their heads. A dozen or so creatures had clawed their way out of the ground and begun biting people. The streets were chaos, panicked crowds scattering in every direction, people attacked and infected as they fled. If this had been the United States, someone might have pulled a gun long ago, but the French, disciplined and stubborn, responded differently. And the real problem was that the first bitten and killed were starting to reawaken under an undead curse, becoming new monsters and spreading the infection into other neighborhoods. By the time officials were finally assembled, it had taken nearly 5 hours of negotiations to arrange a meeting. 18 departments across both the Muggle government and the Ministry of Magic had to sign off. Dozens of newly infected people had become undead and already started spreading. The bureaucracy felt like 18 layers of hell. Fortunately, reliable people do exist in a crisis. President Mitterrand cut short his trip, declared a state of emergency, and ordered the military to take control of Paris. Fully armed troops began isolating and guiding civilians, sealing off major districts and restricting movement. He also demanded the French Minister of Magic come in immediately and wanted full cooperation from the wizards. Something is attacking citizens. and it's contagious. I expect the wizards to provide a solution. At all costs, Paris must not fall. Scattered military detachments were already encountering the creatures. The soldiers quickly learned that these things had no discernible weakness. They were almost mindless, driven only to bite and attack. Bullets could half destroy their heads, and they would still stagger forward. Only fire, incendiary bombs, reliably turned them into charcoal. The quick lesson went out to every unit. Shrink the teams, use fire attacks, and do everything possible to identify and contain the victims before they turned. For a modern army, such unnatural interference could still be handled for a while. Organization, discipline, firepower, equipment. But that was only an entree. The real threat lay below. When the sweating French Minister of Magic spoke to President Mitterrand, the old leader's face grew dark. "Are you saying the wizards are dangerous?" The minister hurried to explain, flustered. "It's not us. We do not." He could have pointed to the record. Even Voldemort, the Dark Lord who had terrorized Britain a decade earlier, had killed only a handful of muggles. Grindelwald had tried to burn Paris, and Dumbledore had stopped him. This, surely, was not the ministry's doing. Still, one person who took the situation seriously was Cornelius Fudge, the British Minister for Magic. He was sound asleep until a knock at his door roused him. The French ministry was asking for help. Fudge tried to wave it off. "Send a few aurors and a combat wizard team to make a gesture and be done with it. Do I need to be disturbed for this?" But his subordinate blocked the door and said the International Confederation of Wizards had also sent a message. That changed everything. The Confederation could reprimand a minister. A public rebuke might cost him his position. As he fumbled into his pajamas, his subordinate explained that the Confederation demanded Britain help the French ministry to prevent a breach of the Statute of Secrecy. "What on earth happened?" Fudge asked, half annoyed, half alarmed. His thoughts slipped back to last year, when 2 towns had been disastrously exposed to magical creatures and the Queen had been alarmed. Dumbledore had had to bring the Order of the Phoenix to subdue a lava giant. It had been a headache for the ministry. Now, Paris was on lockdown, and the International Confederation was involved. Suddenly, Fudge felt less unlucky. For a breathless moment, he even asked about dragon product prices. Small comfort in a crisis, but politics is strange, before slipping on his hat and heading out. Back in Paris, the French Minister of Magic, Minister Fran, had used his personal contacts and called Dumbledore. Ted and Dumbledore had never left Paris that night. Something unusual was happening and they wanted to watch. When Minister Fran asked for help, Dumbledore agreed. Within an hour, special forces assisted by wizards had rounded up the roaming undead and contained the bitten. But the curse left victims helpless, comatose, and close to death. The French ministry scrambled, worried they had no way to save them. Dumbledore arrived himself and said, "Minister Fran, St. Mungo's has an antidote for this curse. Send someone immediately. There's still time to save them." "Good, good. I'll send someone now," Fran ordered, already organizing a team to use the International Flu Network to fetch the cure from Britain. One French wizard, puzzled, muttered aloud, "How do the British already have an antidote?" Ted's perception was sharp. He turned and answered with a half-smile, "It's because of you." Heads turned. Dumbledore looked up with practiced innocence as if he hadn't heard, but Ted continued plainly. "Last autumn, a dark wizard escaped from France to Britain. The reports you sent were delayed. He managed to do a lot of damage before we could catch him. It was that dark wizard who developed this curse," Ted said. "We paid heavily to develop the potion. Wouldn't you say you had a hand in that, by virtue of what happened?" The French wizards were dumbstruck. Their intended derision of their stately, friendly British neighbors had backfired and landed on themselves. Minister Fran, however, moved beyond hurt pride to a critical question. "You mean the events underground are linked to that dark wizard?" Ted nodded. "We're certain. He's the only one we know of who can raise the dead." "What?" The assembled lights went to Dumbledore. He only nodded grimly, thinking over how that wizard, one whose origins might even be from another world, had survived and returned, and what they could do about him now. Ted asked, "What exactly is under Paris that would draw him?" Minister Fran's face suddenly went very pale. He inhaled sharply. Then he said one word, a single, horrified number. 6 million. Silence fell. Beneath Paris lay the catacombs and the remains of millions, an entire underground of bones. If a wizard could raise and assemble skeletons, Paris had just become an enormous arsenal. Stop him! Quick! Stop him! Minister Fran barked. Thanks to readers, buy Chiambeda and Tale number 5 out of 28 for the 100 reward. Chapter 3 of 4. I see your attitude. Minister Mitterrand, the French president, had just returned from viewing the afflicted. He looked like a man drained of color. These creatures had gone completely feral, mindless, driven only to tear at the living. An hour earlier he had been a Frenchman. Now he stood before what once had been a man. Congealed, viscous blood, stiff, withered limbs that no longer felt pain or fear. The contagion was terrifying and insidious. It spread easily. Infection could occur even without a bite, though those cases showed a much longer incubation. There was no cure, at least none universally trusted. England claimed to have an antidote and had gone to retrieve it, but Mitterrand didn't trust the Brits' promises. He muttered darkly about the British disposition for plunder. Then, half to himself, he added that the last thing he'd seen that morning's headlines had been the usual, daily shootings in America. Enforce the strictest isolation and full protective measures. Deploy our emergency forces with the best equipment. We are in a state of war. Notify neighboring countries. I want immediate talks with their leaders. Contact Europe now, he barked. Orders flew out. Officials scrambled. The Élysée Palace was lit like day, and armed guards filled its halls. Even a normally composed figure like Mitterrand lost his cool when Minister Fran of the French Ministry of Magic reported the worst of the news. Fran had approached the situation at first as a grave infectious disease. After all, curses and ancient magics were always harder for politicians to comprehend. But no contagion explained dead bones standing up and attacking the living. You mean the enemy is down there, in the great cemetery, raising skeletons? Mitterrand demanded. Fran could only nod. Her eyes pleaded, these aren't our people either. We're victims here. Mitterrand slammed his hand on the table. Connect me to General Pitt. I want to see the special emergency force in 40 minutes. They have to get underground and find the source. The great cemetery beneath Paris housed roughly 6 million interred remains. Even if half had long since crumbled, that still meant 3 million intact skeletons. On average, 1 or 2 for every living Parisian. The prospect of 2 or 3 million skeletons swarming the streets made Mitterrand want to tear his hair out. This was Paris, the heart of France. He would not let magic desecrate it. If the skeletons had already flooded the city, wizards alone would be of limited use. Modern armed forces would be ruthlessly effective. But to root out whatever was animating the dead down in narrow crypts and tunnels, wizards were indispensable. The French Ministry of Magic mobilized over 60 elite wizards, organized into 10 teams to accompany special forces into the underground via secret entrances. Fran looked toward Dumbledore with a mixture of hope and desperation. Dumbledore, we need help, at least until the International Confederation of Wizards can respond, she said. Dumbledore nodded. I will try to delay any ritual magic, buy you 10 hours if I can. He would not be going underground. That was not the field where he was needed. First, he had to go to Austria. For a wizard like him, crossing borders took mere minutes. But when he arrived at the Dark Tower at Nurmengard, he saw something that chilled him. It was empty. Too late, he murmured. Nurmengard had once held the first-generation dark arts wizard, Grindelwald, a far greater threat than petty, power-hungry dark wizards like Voldemort, because Grindelwald's dream had been open domination. Wizards ruling over muggles. That idea alone threatened to plunge the world into a catastrophic war. Wizards had always been few in number, hundreds of thousands at most, certainly nowhere near the population of a large modern city, and to impose rule on the vast muggle world was madness. Grindelwald had gathered many followers in his day, even forming the Saint organization that once claimed nearly 100,000 wizards at its height. But most of that support had been nominal, and the movement had collapsed after defeat. Still, the most dangerous members of that old guard had survived into extreme old age. In the magic world, elderly elites were often the most dangerous. Now, Dumbledore feared, during the chaos sweeping Europe, Grindelwald had escaped Nurmengard. In the normal timeline, After his defeat and later death in the tower at the hands of Lord Voldemort, the Saint organization faded for good. But the past few years had changed things. Lord Voldemort's downfall, the emergence of magical races from other worlds, changes that gave those long-buried ambitions new hope. Last year, during the Land of Fire incident, some core members had even attempted to rescue Grindelwald at Nurmengard. Grindelwald had refused then, claiming it wasn't the right time. Now, with Paris in chaos, perhaps he felt the time had come. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Ted had already set things in motion. He sent word to his companions to come to Paris. At the scale of this event, it was a national-level catastrophe, an opportunity to gain experience and resources that would make any adventurer's eyes light up. He began preparing on the ground, drawing magic circles across the city, requisitioning materials through the French ministry and other officials, and erecting 12 iron towers 18 meters high, each topped with a crystal core he had refined. At first, the French wizards were reluctant to be bothered with him. With Dumbledore absent, what could a half-grown kid hope to do? Ted answered them with actions rather than words. He used a large alchemical array to dismantle a derelict 12-story apartment building. Inside were 7 or 8 zombies, and convert it into usable building materials. Then he spoke. "You sent for aid. I didn't come on my own. I was studying alchemy with Nicholas Flamel, and Dumbledore invited me along. If I'm not welcome, I'll leave." He turned as if to activate teleportation. Minister Fran, practical as ever, grabbed his arm and softened her tone. In a crisis like this, refusing foreign aid would be sheer folly. A young wizard capable of such alchemy, possibly someone who had indeed studied with Flamel, could not be treated as a nobody. Better to appease him than to turn away help. Ted produced a magic item directory and made it plain that he had already placed clients or contracts with each of the teams going into the Great Cemetery. If the French treated him rudely, he would walk. He'd left a lot of ties behind and didn't intend to be insulted. After all, he thought, it was only a few million skeletons. At worst, Paris might end up being shelled. It wasn't his home anyway. Chapter 305. If it were him because Minister Fran had been so courteous, Ted began reaching out to the various underground teams through the provisional network he had set up. "Bonjour, bonjour, can you hear me?" he broadcast. The group chat exploded. "Hey, it's speaking. This thing's talking." "That boy's voice. Alex, is that you? I hear you. It's me. Anthony, are you all right?" The chat descended into chaos. Ted muted everyone at once, then said, "Everyone, don't argue. This is the ground command center. I'm going to report the status of each team. We're lost. There are too many branching tunnels. We haven't gotten very far. We ran into zombies and dealt with them. We were ambushed. It's bad. 3 people are down, 2 wounded. Several non-magical soldiers are breaking down emotionally. We need support. Hey, don't point that metal wand at me. Creepy." "Understood. Don't panic. The ground command will locate every team, send real-time positions, and make contact. For those who need extraction, backup will reach you in roughly 10 minutes. Ted activated the 12 antennas, sending coverage out across Paris. Thanks to the magic technology advances the school had made over the past year, this was possible, something that, not long ago, would have been unthinkable. Maintaining even limited communication would have been an achievement. Now he could do more. He replicated the terrain of Paris inside the ideal land map editor, integrating a full 3-dimensional simulation of reality in the game. He could see the entire battlefield at once. Minister Fran and the French wizards watched in stunned silence. The British had this kind of technology? Impossible. French diplomatic and intelligence officers who had been observing the wizards immediately recorded the scene to report back to their superiors. These strange, robed people were powerful. With the full map view supporting them, the dozen or so small teams in the tunnels finally stopped floundering like headless chickens. But the underground was still treacherous. Space was tight, light was scarce, and many passages were barely wide enough for one person. In those conditions, both special forces and wizards found their combat effectiveness severely limited, and the risk of ambush extremely high. One team had already paid dearly. 3 special forces operatives were dead, 2 injured, and 4 shaken. Of 5 wizards, 1 had died, 1 was wounded, and several were in a poor spirit state. One was on the edge of claustrophobia. They had run into 2 vengeful spirits and 5 zombies, surrounded by countless broken skeletons. If they didn't get support quickly, they would collapse on their own within a couple of hours. The catacombs harbored too many skeletons, zombies, and worst of all, vengeful spirits. Some skeletons were little more than a skull and 1 arm or half an upper torso, but they could leap out of corners and bite at an ankle. 1 bite meant a curse. That knowledge, knowing you would die and being powerless to stop it, was crippling in a place like this. A teammate's only option might be to watch you turn into an enemy in 30 or 60 minutes. In that environment, despair was lethal. Even so, some of the wizards were calm because they were elites who could apparate in emergencies. That knowledge helped keep panic from spreading. Ted was not comfortingly lying when he promised backup in 10 minutes. He meant it. His extraction plan was crude but effective. After locating trapped teams on the ideal land map, he teleported into the air above the city, targeted an empty apartment block, and demolished it on a massive scale. A 6-story building was reduced to brick and stone. Ted even used the principles of the mending charm to sort and stack the rubble in hopes of easing later reconstruction. He assumed French officials would compensate the owners. Then he turned the foundation into mud and drilled a shaft straight down. In front of a dozen wizards and French diplomats, he opened a 2-meter-wide, 48-meter-deep skylight. That was what a divine rescuer looked like, opening a hole in the ground and descending like a savior. He dropped the shaft directly above the trapped team and hauled the survivors up through the opening. As the last of them emerged, applause and cheers broke out across the command channel. Ted reported the successful extraction and promised, "We will not abandon anyone. We've secured the potion to remove the curse. Prioritize your safety, expand your search areas as you can, and help us fully explore the underground." When Ted's message appeared on the comm logs, both wizards and special forces felt an enormous sense of relief. It was a simple, shared feeling. We're not alone. We can do this. Courage and confidence spread. The officials and wizards nearby found themselves suddenly buoyed by the thought, if it were him, maybe we could actually pull this off. Ted had also obtained a decades-old map of the catacombs from the French government. He fed it into the editor to compare it against his live simulation, lighting up what still matched. Outside, the sky was beginning to pale with dawn. Dumbledore reappeared. He waved his wand, gathered clouds, and cast a weather charm that let a steady mist spill from them, blanketing Paris. A grand gesture. Though most of Paris was already under control, Dumbledore was careful to conceal the operation and avoid violating the statute of secrecy. Reinforcements arrived from nearby countries, wizard detachments of 30 to 50, some of 20 to 30. Representatives of the International Confederation of Wizards and other national magic organizations came as well. Ted even saw the legendary elven elder of the Wizengamot. He looked about 30, pale and beardless, strikingly handsome, with long golden hair and pointed ears partly hidden by his hat. Ted didn't dare judge him rashly, but from past experience he reckoned the elf's charm must be off the charts. No wonder he had risen quickly in the most authoritative British circles. Dumbledore's action intensified. A vast magical force poured out of the clouds, suffusing the mist with his power. Ted stared. How did Dumbledore have so much magic? Something felt off. The power sank into the ground, seeping deep into the soil. Ryan, who was overseeing a ritual far below, opened his eyes and frowned. Someone was interfering with his large-scale psychic rite. That was exactly what Dumbledore intended, an indirect disruption to make Ryan's ritual fail or at least delay it. The elder wizards present, those with finely tuned perception, looked up at the sky in astonishment, as if they'd been shown something impossible. What was this method? What kind of magic was this? Was this the greatest white wizard of the century? At that moment, Dumbledore had pushed to the very peak of contemporary magical power. It was as if he'd pried open the ceiling and glimpsed some of the landscape beyond. I've got the day off tomorrow. I've got the day off tomorrow. Taking the day off. Taking the day off. 312. Ted's plea for help. As the ancients said, the right time isn't as good as the right place, and the right place isn't as good as the right people. As for the right time, Ryan had it in spades. To be the first to enter this world under these circumstances, and by chance, master the Death Knight's death power, that felt like fate. The right people were on his side too. Just look at how loyal Lord Voldemort and Barty were to him. But it was the right place that mattered most. Paris had accumulated centuries of death, and that accumulation was Ryan's advantage. Which city buries its dead underfoot, concentrated and even displayed like art for tourists, as if to make sure no one could miss them? Millions of skeletons, pressing down through the ages, had turned the deep underground into a fertile ground for death magic. When Ryan first arrived, the sheer density of that magic made him feel as if he had passed through the gates of the underworld. When he catalyzed the stagnant death magic with a ritual, the vast, almost boundless sea of death intoxicated him. At first, he never intended to simply raise millions of skeletons and conquer the world by numbers. A cunning wizard who had survived decades alone knew the limits of concentrated forces. Summoned minions can't protect a summoner if the summoner is killed. The obvious counter is to bypass the summons and strike at the source. Real power was becoming powerful himself. His initial plan, what he told his two treacherous subordinates, was a superficial cover. His true scheme was to absorb the accumulated death magic of the great cemetery beneath Paris to enhance his own strength. He had been suppressed by Dumbledore before, because he was weaker. If this place had even half the rumored potency, he would have confidence to change the tide. It turned out to be 10 times better than he expected. After a night of ritual catalysis, the death magic began to surge and flow through the catacombs. A thin gray mist drifted along the tomb passages. The death power was so dense it began to take form. Countless relatively well-preserved skulls started to tremble as bean-sized blue soul fires flickered in their eye sockets. The decayed soil, brittle bone fragments, scattered dry bones, ugly stones, graffiti patterns, and grotesque sculptures carved by subterranean revelers all began to mutate, deform, and recombine under the influence of the magic. Ryan was ecstatic. If he could absorb this portion of the death magic, what would Dumbledore amount to? Forget Dumbledore. Within 7 days, he was confident he could turn the country into a kingdom of death, then spend a month converting neighboring lands. He would be the god of death in this world. Then Dumbledore moved. Dumbledore is Dumbledore. Age makes him only more dangerous. His intervention not only shocked the wizards who had come from other countries to support him, it also stunned Ryan, who was presiding over the ritual deep underground. About 70 or 80 meters below the surface, in a stone hall enlarged by Lord Voldemort and Barty with magic, yes, he'd treated them like laborers, Ryan stood on a circular bone plate that no longer looked like stone, but like a single piece of calcified bone. Nearly 2 tons of dry human bones had been fused into a white disc 12 meters across. Around its rim, 12 sectors were carved, arranged for the 12 zodiac signs, and within each sector, a corresponding terrifying undead guardian had been created. Ryan himself had already absorbed a considerable amount of death magic and undergone a radical transformation. Where he'd once looked like a half-dead monster, rubbery skin covered in thorns and bony protuberances, a wide mouth full of fangs, one ghostly hideous hand, he was now tall and thin, a skin-and-bones figure with oddly human facial features but a deathly pallor. The demonic wrist he had once grafted to himself had given way. He had returned to a more human form, yet still resembled a pale, thin skeleton wrapped in a tattered robe, leaning on a white bone staff. With the 12 specially created undead aiding the ritual and millions of skeletons and spirits stirring below, his aura was terrifying. Lord Voldemort glanced at Barty with suspicion. "You little brat," he hissed. "You didn't betray us and intentionally lead this devil here, did you? How are we supposed to fight this?" None of the muggles or mediocre wizards present could possibly be his real opponents. Had they all helped raise a supremely powerful master? Would Voldemort be relegated to the role of the oppressed little brother forever? He found himself secretly hoping Dumbledore would be strong enough to take down this old monster, or at least that both sides would suffer heavy losses. Dumbledore did better than anyone expected. A strange, unfamiliar magic began seeping down from the surface and mixing with the actively surging death magic below. Strangely, the death power did not repel it. With masterful transfiguration, Dumbledore had changed the attribute of his own magic, guiding natural magic to merge into the catacombs and freely mingle with the death power. The result was impure, hard-to-control death magic. Directly, this meant Ryan's absorption efficiency plummeted to 1/10 what it had been. The soul fires in many newly animated skulls flickered out and went quiet. Although some skeletons still revived, the rate dropped dramatically. Where Ryan had been minutes away from mastering a vast portion of the death magic and reviving most of the undead, now it would take 3 to 5 days at the current speed. Ryan swore under his breath. If the ritual depended on him alone, he would have wanted a duel right then. Seeing the great path open only for someone else to foul it was infuriating. On the surface, the top combatants of both sides were locked in a stalemate. Ted and his allies were racing the clock. Even at the slowed pace, the undead plague would break loose in 3 to 5 days, and Dumbledore likely wouldn't have enough stamina to hold Ryan longer than that. The ritual had to be destroyed within 36 hours, 2 days and a night, so Dumbledore would still have the energy to fight Ryan afterward. Ding! Mission triggered. Death in the City of Love, deep into the catacombs. The City of Love has fallen into a death crisis. You can't rely on those people now, so the burden is on you. Go deep into the catacombs and find him. Target: find the undead altar. Reward: 3,580 experience points. Card: Flip Trap, green. The underground catacombs you need to explore stretch 187 kilometers. Your time is limited. Good luck. Ted read the mission and said, "Looks like the main quest is here, and it's a series." He needed to issue missions too. Dawn strained to rise over the horizon, as if reluctant to leave bed. Apparition arrived nearby. Mr. Weasley had come with a group of young wizards. 5 Weasleys were present. Besides the twins and Ron, even Percy and Ginny, both about to graduate, had come. Hermione, Neville, Harry, and Jerry were there as well. Friends, this scene is even bigger than last time. Ready? Ted asked with a smile. Hermione wanted to grill Ted about where he'd been for the past half-month, but there was no time for catching up. Ted already had a plan, and he needed help, more help than his friends alone could provide. He had posted a pinned thread on the Ideal Land forum. Help! Calling all brave little wizards. Save Paris. Save the people. The post explained the situation. The mastermind behind last year's chaos in the Forbidden Forest did not die completely, and has now returned. He knows he cannot stand against Dumbledore directly, so he chose a roundabout approach, reviving the millions of dry bones under the City of Love to turn Paris into a city of death. Whoever you are, wherever you are, we need your help. Come to Paris to find us, while there is still time. Ted and his little wizards. Thanks to reader Woojin Luoho for the 500-point reward. Chapter 307, Gamer Saves the World. The magic world was so starved for entertainment that the little wizards were bored out of their minds during the holidays, and they took their two-way mirror login devices with them wherever they went. Less than 3 minutes after Ted posted his thread, more than 20 replies had already come in. He answered the key questions, explained the situation, and the process for coming over. Diagon Alley had opened the International Flu Network, and the Ministries of Magic were handling transports. The French ministry had been put in charge of receiving arrivals, and Ted's name already carried weight there. France even assigned 4 people specifically to assist him and pass along messages. They were taking it very seriously. Ted's plan was simple and pragmatic. He didn't think a handful of elite aurors or special forces could handle a 100-kilometer-long underground tomb, let alone find Ryan's altar. These were not subterranean workers. Their skill sets didn't match. And if they did find the altar, wouldn't they instantly turn into undead? With so many wizards, how could they possibly survive such attrition? From the start, Ted wanted a method that didn't need to throw lives away. Those 12 large antennae weren't just for revealing the map. The little wizards still had a strong sense of justice. Even though France had been hit, even though it was dangerous, and even though many parents couldn't see why schoolchildren were needed, nearly 100 little wizards showed up over the next few hours. They'd come because Ted asked, because someone was in danger. "Ted, we're here," called his roommates. "Ted, we came to help." Clara and Bronzebeard arrived as well, making the French officials blink in surprise. Ted, can we help? Ginny's classmates were there too, Colin Creevy and his brother among them, along with the entire Gryffindor Quidditch team. Familiar faces crowded the hall. There were dozens of worried parents trailing in as well. Once Ted explained his plan and repeatedly assured everyone the little wizards would be safe, the parents relaxed. Their rough sentiment could be summed up as, "Ted, we trust you. If the kids won't listen, give them a good scolding. Just don't kill them." By now, hundreds of wizards had gathered in Paris. Ministries from across Europe had sent support. A few wizards had even come from Africa. The old guard from the Wizard Alliance turned up too, beards as long as Dumbledore's. But organizing them was chaos. Language barriers alone required more than a dozen translators, and meetings crawled along. After more than an hour of discussions, many plans were still unsettled. Minister Fran of France was sweating. Ted sighed. Wizards had been at peace so long they'd lost the knack for quick, efficient cooperation. Powerful wizards were often eccentric, and without a unified command, it was a nightmare. The French intelligence officers taking down names shook their heads. They had to record the mess. At this rate, even if there were millions of them, they wouldn't be any real threat to ordinary people. It would be a miracle if they didn't self-destruct. Ted had a solution. He took out a batch of small crystals, shaped them into discrete earpieces, and poured spiritual energy into them. These were simple devices with one function: instant translation. Understanding language was an easy task for a spiritual energy warlock. Slap one on, and whatever another person said was converted on the fly into the language you knew best. Even elite wizards had never seen anything like it. There were parchment and quill translation charms for text, but nothing that did real-time interpretation. The room buzzed. Had the wizards of Great Britain already reached this level? Minister Fran noticed Cornelius Fudge's surprise, and then realized this device had been invented by Ted. No wonder Ted could marshal this ragged group. He brought useful magic to the table. Magic was the wizard's foundation. Ted needed large amounts of it to pull off his plan. At Hogwarts, he could tap into the school's accumulated magic with the Ravenclaw Chamber backdoor program. That was where his server was located. Little wizards could log in through two-way mirrors and pay the magic cost to access it. But out here, the network alone wasn't enough. They needed live magical power. The underground magic was death magic and unusable. So Ted asked the present human magic pools to help. High-ranking officials and elite wizards divided into 3 rotating shifts to pour power into his system. Ted planned to envelop Paris in an ideal land, a layered reality illusion using intertwined rules. That way the little wizards could explore the underground cemetery without real casualties. It was a huge undertaking. Even with divination and careful planning, getting anywhere near the central ritual area normally required surviving many brutal encounters. Ted didn't want to follow others' rules anyway. He had his own. He organized teams the way the Magic Alliance used to at school. Ted as one team, his companions as a 5-person squad, and most classmates grouped into 5-person teams. These formations gave them synergy and tacit understanding. Ted also relaxed in-game restrictions to beef up the little wizards. Skills increased, talent development opened up, pet and summoning systems activated. The talent tree wasn't complete, but it could grant useful effects like biscuit delivery, potion replenishment, Windrunner's blessing, and Thunderlord's decree. For pets, the French ministry provided spirit cats, magical creatures that could create clones, used as guards. Cats had high spirituality and could be linked into the ideal land after being hypnotized. Each child took one. 20 wizard teams began fanning toward the center. They could communicate, share maps, and support each other. When a team won a fight inside the ideal land, that section of magic could be siphoned to replenish the temporary system. The little wizards gained game experience, while Ted gained real-world magical stability. If a little wizard suffered a fatal injury in the simulation, they were simply ejected. Their bodies were unharmed, and after a 10 or 20-minute recovery, they could try again. The adult wizards were skeptical, until Ted opened a live broadcast window in midair. The 20 teams appeared in split screen for everyone to watch. Parents, meanwhile, poured magic into the project and anxiously monitored their children. "Come on, son, kill those skeletons. It's safe behind them," one shouted. "Good, that's it. Turner, your daughter and my boy work great together. Maybe our families should." "Shut up, your son isn't fit for my daughter." Eileen's team met a monster. It's a bone thing built from a dozen broken skeletons. Who can support them? "Wraiths! It's wraiths!" "Thank goodness they brought items. Why doesn't my son's team have any? He has all food, no equipment." Under the Ideal Land's protection, Ted and the teams locked down the outer layers in 2 hours, what would have been 2 days and a night of work. They pushed inward until an area about 2 kilometers across remained. The undead were far stronger there. The smaller teams were wiped out. Dancing king zombies, tombstone golems, bone halls, ghost graffiti, and aggregated vengeful spirits, rare, bizarre elites over level 10, overwhelmed them. Only Ted and his companion team could still operate in that center. Still, the little wizard's coordination and combat prowess surprised the adults. These schoolchildren fought skillfully. When the adults saw their kids push forward against terrifying monsters without flinching, they had mixed emotions. Pride, awe, and a lot of parental resentment when other people's children were better trained than their own. Wizards from other countries felt it most keenly. They were convinced they'd been left behind, that Great Britain had secretly evolved. Ted had already asked his companions to support him from the rear. The core area lay ahead, and he expected to meet Ryan soon. He intended to go personally, no needless sacrifices. A death in the Ideal Land cost mental power and locked you out of the game for a while. The more miserable the death, the longer the downtime. Ted had no desire to waste that. What Ted didn't know then was that other forces were watching too. Lord Voldemort and Barty Crouch were tangled up in this mess. The prophecy had hinted at wider trouble, but Ted hadn't thought that far. Then, deep underground, he suddenly found a living person. Expelliarmus, Protego, enemy-repelling Jinx, Levicorpus, Finite Incantatum, Bombarda Maxima, Air Shield, Petrificus Totalis, Avada Kedavra. Spells flashed and collided in a blur. Ted crouched just around the corner, a small smile tugging at his lips. In the space of 5 seconds, both duelists had launched 4 or 5 spells apiece, an intense, tightly packed exchange of attack and defense inside the narrow tunnel. His opponent was frighteningly good, almost at the level of a professor. Calm, experienced, with razor-sharp combat instincts, he answered every feint and riposte perfectly. If he'd been any slower, Ted could have tricked him. Ted felt a rush of delight. He'd rarely had the chance to spar with anyone like this. Most encounters recorded in Gryffindor's adventure book were monsters or one-off threats. Few wizards reached this caliber, and fewer still had been written into the book as proper rivals. This was a rare pleasure. He didn't want to burn his psychic energy. With both systems available, the opponent would have fallen in minutes, and that would have been wasteful. So Ted held back, savoring the fight. On the other side, Barty Crouch Jr. was sweating. He prided himself on casting speed. No one from his school days had matched him, but this other caster was faster and steadier. The timing of the responses, the pressure he radiated, it unnerved Barty. He'd even tried the killing curse, only to be thwarted by an illusion. If that had been a premeditated ambush, Barty would already be dead. Who was this? An auror from France? No, the style was unmistakably British. If the British wizarding community had shown up too, then the plan was proceeding perfectly. "What are you grinning at? Talk to me, I'm listening." Ted stepped out from a nearby shadow. Barty nearly dropped his wand. Instinct made him fire toward the sound, but the voice and the caster were coming from different directions. When he finally saw the figure blocking his path, he froze. The wizard was a half-grown boy. Ted planted himself in the tunnel and smiled, wand leveled. "I'm Ted Epiphany, a 4th year at Hogwarts. Sir, your turn." Barty stared, taking in the boy's build, length of arm, every detail a duelist looks for, then said slowly, "I am Barty Crouch Jr." Ted showed little reaction, but the live feed outside exploded. Barty Crouch, well known in Britain as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, standing in a tunnel and naming himself? The ministry contingent on scene turned pale. "He's lying," someone blurted. "Head Crouch is in his 50s, 60s. Another voice added, "He said he's Barty Crouch Jr. Head Crouch's son died 10 years ago." Whispers ran through the crowd. Someone muttered, half joking, "Dead, but not quite dead." The British are good at that sort of thing. The whole mess threatened to become a national scandal. Then a group apparated in. At their head was the gaunt, top-hatted figure of Barty Crouch Sr., looking stern and drained. "What's happening here?" he demanded. Nobody answered. Barty Sr. stared at the glowing broadcast, his face going white. He gave a wry, bitter smile, took off his hat, and without turning fully around said, "As head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, I am guilty. Kingsley Shacklebolt, I'm leaving this to you for now." He handed his wand to Kingsley, and in that single gesture, relinquishing his command of the Aurors and reinforcements, saved a shred of the ministry's dignity. Back in the tunnel, the duel resumed. Barty Jr. sent a dark, black cloud at Ted. Ted's wand light dispersed it. They'd begun with the old ritual. Names, a formal bow, then thrown themselves into a no-nonsense battle. Both were unusually composed and frightfully competent. Barty Jr. unleashed a torrent of dark arts spells, several Ted had never even heard of, but Ted's psychic augmented attributes gave him the edge. Faster reactions, keener perception, blistering speed. He often finished a charm in a single syllable, waiting to strike until the precise instant. Time and again, that hesitation unsettled Barty, who realized, with growing dread, that his opponent was beyond anything a fourth year should be. If the boy's height and features were to be believed, he was still at school, yet his technique suggested years of actual combat. Barty briefly allowed himself a panicked comparison, then pushed it away. His own master had been a far greater threat than any schoolboy. Escape was a practical, unashamed option. Barty Jr. understood that too. He could not simply apparate away. Ted had set anti-apparition protections. He couldn't run straight out or be followed. So he blew a hole in the tunnel's ceiling with a blasting curse, cast a choking, stinging smoke of his own design to fill the passage, and bolted. Ted was behind him, but the smoke covered Barty's flight. Ted was surprised by the daring, but he wasn't worried. He was already within the range of his ideal land and could track the man down later. The sparring partner had escaped for now. Ted turned his attention back to his primary objective. Outside, people were trying to take stock. They'd just watched a high-level duel in an unusual underground setting, and it had shaken them. Barty Sr., pale and shaking, had handed responsibility to Kingsley Shacklebolt, an act that softened what would otherwise have been an embarrassing international spectacle. Ted continued deeper. He didn't have to go far before another enemy appeared. He'd reached the core area overseen by Sagittarius and faced a fused construct. An entry card hovering in the air read, Zodiac 12 Death Messengers, Skeleton Archer, Level 13. It had 4 arms. Bone arrows burned with a pale green flame. Its skull had an empty hole in the forehead, and a blue soul fire flickered within. Underground, its advantages were muted, no room to maneuver or vanish, though an ordinary wizard could still be riddled with those flaming arrows. Ted moved quickly. Even with its rapid volleys, it couldn't bring him down, and he dismantled it within 2 minutes, leaving a scattering of broken bones. He collected the card and chuckled. "Quite creative," he said. Then Ted changed direction, not continuing straight, but cutting across the ecliptic to find a new route. As he'd suspected, another undead monster appeared. A giant scorpion made entirely of white bone. The name hovering over it read, 12 Death Messengers of the Zodiac, Bone Giant Scorpion, Level 13. Ted had seen a clue in the skeleton archer's name earlier, and the bone scorpion confirmed his suspicion. This thing was a walking skeleton assembly, plates of bone for armor, smaller bones forming segmented limbs, joints reinforced with strange protective rings, and barbs and bone blades spiking its body. Its 2 pincers were huge, and the tip of its long tail was a skull the size of a wash basin. The skull's jaw was open, and from it extended a curved black scythe. Even ignoring its combat ability, the thing was visually impressive, big boss material through and through. It could also move freely through soil, giving it a huge home field advantage. Against an ordinary party, 3 to 5 opponents of the same level would take heavy losses. But it had walked straight into Ted's hands. He had a spell that could turn mud into stone. The scorpion tried to ambush Ted from underground, only to crash into suddenly hardened earth, wasted its drilling magic, and then Ted activated Point the Ground to Steel. The Taoist technique, simulated by magic, made the ground as hard as steel, precisely countering earth-burrowing maneuvers. Even a copper head and iron forehead couldn't bore through. The scorpion ended up trapped in rock. Ted picked up the card, examined the bone scorpion's core and structure, and admired the technicality of the design. Someone had used the zodiac as part of a magic array, some ritual conducted underground, drawing on star power. Ted couldn't figure out the reasoning, reverse psychology maybe, but it didn't matter. Whatever the enemy wanted, he'd just destroy it. He still had time, clear the peripheral guardians, then call Dumbledore to handle the big boss and enjoy the show. Besides, this wave had yielded plenty of experience and cards. The underground tomb was stuffed with monsters. If not for over 100 classmates helping to clear them, Ted alone couldn't have killed so many in 3 days. Even then, by his estimate, they'd only taken down 4,000 or 5,000 undead, probably a fraction of what slumbered in the tunnels. Sometimes he could hear bone-grinding noises from nearby passages, a skeleton getting back up. Across the 100-plus kilometers of tunnels, dozens to hundreds of undead could awaken every minute, and the pace only accelerated. He needed a solution. Ted reached into his bosom and took out a small red and white ball. He tossed it to the floor. "This is it, Softy." With a soft bang, an apple-scented jelly-like creature poured out of the orb and spread to nearly fill the tunnel. "Go, Softy. Eat. Eat all the undead and anything infected with death magic. Eat, eat, eat." Softy had no mouth, so it expressed indignation as appetite. "Softy, I'm going to eat, eat, eat." While Softy began devouring tainted matter, Ted pressed on with the Zodiac undead. Next up should be Libra, right? Wonder what it'll be? He felt like he was opening a blind box. When he arrived, it wasn't a single monster at all, but a flesh factory. A wide area of white bone, rotting flesh, and fascia forming a macabre assembly line. On one side of a scale, strange masses of bone and flesh were produced. Then death magic was continuously pumped into them and slid to the other side, transforming into various undead. Over 100 had already accumulated, each different. Most were around level 8 or 9, and Ted even found a level 10, a hive-type monster. Awesome. Ted pulled out a handful of cards. "Let's battle." He summoned an armored troll, a mud-to-stone golem, a jackalweir arm squad, and a raptor squad. The mount's undead goblins drop. His pets, Big White Horse Cabbage, Chicken Bro, and Ansu, arrived as well. Ted opened with an incinerate spell. One blast vaporized more than 20 undead outright and set another 20 aflame. Stones rained from the tunnel ceiling, but a flesh membrane covering the area held things together. Otherwise, they'd have to change the battlefield. While Ted cleaned up elite monsters, the clash between Ryan and Dumbledore on the magical plane intensified. Ryan had never been patient. He wanted results now. Dumbledore, by contrast, favored delay and careful work. Frustrated by the old man's stalling, Ryan tried to wrest magic control, attacking Dumbledore's spells. Dumbledore had more raw experience on this arcane level, decades of mastery, and he seemed on the verge of a breakthrough. He didn't have Ryan's cruel sharpness, but he could harass and frustrate him. The exchanges left Ryan irritated. Outside, more and more wizards gathered, and they stopped merely observing. Many ancient magical lineages began to display unique abilities against the underground threat. No single one was decisive, but together these elite European spellcasters formed a formidable force. Their constant interference made Ryan uneasy. The ritual he'd started might fail because of the endless disruptions. If he kept waiting, the ritual could be ruined rather than completed. So Ryan stopped hiding. Killing and ambushing were his strengths. Subtle, drawn-out ritual work was not. He began to absorb the surrounding death magic directly, using undead materials and a massive infusion of arcane power to sculpt a body, an external avatar. His original self remained at the ritual site, while the avatar took to the air, heading straight for Dumbledore with the intention of fighting the old wizard to the death. By then, Ted had already cleared Virgo, a death nun. In life, she had been blind and framed, murdered and hastily buried. Her resentment had left a seed of undead. She wore a tattered habit and a seamless white bone mask over the upper half of her face. Leo, by contrast, was a swarm of corpse lice the size of baby fists, thousands of them gathering into shifting, arbitrary shapes and dispersing into an endless wave of death insects. Cancer manifested as a giant crab within a pool of foul, viscous blood whose toxicity and curses were deadly. The crab had no solid body, only a crab-shaped mass of blood, meaning it wouldn't die unless the pool dried up. Ted moved in a spherical shield, as if drifting through a sea of blood. The environment itself was more dangerous than the foe. Gemini was a merged child's corpse, two bodies stuck back to back, a deeply unsettling stage that made many watching wizards retch. Ted himself felt physiological unease passing it. Ryan's avatar had already engaged Dumbledore in midair. Although Dumbledore neared a breakthrough, Ryan's progress had been faster in his own brutal fashion. The avatar seemed to hold the initiative. Bone spikes, bone teeth, bone spears filled the sky, bone shields wrapped his form, bone walls sprouted at whim. One French wizard who tried to ambush Ryan in midair was singled out. Ryan pointed, and the man underwent a monstrous distortion, partly transforming into a monster. Only the combined suppression of 7 or 8 white-bearded elders prevented the full mutation. Even then, it was uncertain whether the man would ever fully recover. Sensible wizards began organizing evacuations. In a battlefield like this, they had no right to spectate. Their only hope was to get out alive. Ryan's avatar was eerily human, tall, handsome, resembling him, but cloaked in layers of frantic magic. The surrounding environment withered where the halo touched. Plants felled. Fish and insects died outright. Spells deflected by the avatar didn't dissipate normally. They erupted into monstrous surges of chaotic magic that pounced on nearby living things. Death magic floated around him like a gigantic cloak, occasionally bursting into blossoms of necrotic power. Even stone weathered and crumbled on contact. The earth began to rot where he walked. His mere presence sent a chill through anyone still in sight, the raw fear of death. He also had passive effects that enhanced undead, though those abilities didn't particularly help in a duel against Dumbledore. Still, he casually raised an 8-meter bone gate from the ground. The gate swung open and poured forth a wave of skeleton soldiers, skeleton knights, wraiths, and zombies. 316. Firearms are useless. The wizards had fallen back. There was no way they could interfere with the duel between Dumbledore and Ryan. Ryan, however, casually raised a massive arched gate from the ground, a lattice of countless intersecting bones. As the bone gate swung open, a geyser of undead poured out. The front ranks of skeleton soldiers were so thick that some were trampled by those behind them, crushed into bone fragments. Many carried bone weapons, swords, shields, spears, while others were crude and fragile, their yellowed bones crumbling with a single run. A great number were practically unarmed, clutching nothing more than clubs or rusted iron blades. Most eye-catching of all were the Bone Knights, 40-50 of them at least. Their skeletal mounts' eye sockets burned with ghost fire, and there wore rusted iron plate, chainmail, tattered banners, and battle robes. A faint, mist-like death magic coiled about them, weaving into a formation that amplified their power. That aura strengthened the Bone Knights and radiated outward, making undead dozens of meters away faster and more frenzied. Beyond skeletons, there were zombies, fresh remains, because the catacombs had recently been filled with holiday crowds. School break was the peak season for underground parties, and some thrill-seeking youths had gone below ground after rock concerts, thinking they'd found a rave. A batch of over 100 of them had been personally turned by Ryan. Among them had even been dancing king zombies and rock and roll zombies. There were ugly, robe-wrapped specters wailing and shedding tears of blood, pools of foul, fluid mass, mishmashes like bone chariots, and even a 20-meter-long serpent of bone and gelatinous fat, an undead leviathan as thick as a small water tank. Ryan hadn't made all of them. He'd simply created the right environment, catalyzing corpses and death magic so that strange undead would form, then opened a sewer in the underground to pull them up to the surface. Open fire, stop those things, the French general barked. Compared to the stunned wizards, the French soldiers reacted faster. Thanks to Ted's long-running live broadcast, ordinary troops were mentally prepared for the grotesque spectacle, so when the order came, they unleashed rifles, shotguns, even RPGs. A row of portable mortars waited behind them for bombardment. They were in Paris, but the city mattered little now. The undead surprised them. The weakest skeletons shattered under volleys of bullets, and ordinary skeletons collapsed in seconds beneath machine gun fire. Zombies were tougher. An RPG could still obliterate several at once. But the Bone Knights and other elite undead shrugged at ballistic weapons. Their shared magical aura sapped the weapon's effectiveness. Bullets that passed through that shimmering field couldn't penetrate what looked like rusted plate. They merely pinged off and fell. Even explosion flames seemed to be partially repelled, stalling half a meter from impact. When armored skeleton cavalry charged out of the smoke, the soldiers froze. "Grenades! Heavy firepower! Keep firing! Prepare for bombardment," the commander shouted, snapping them back into action. Luckily, the aura only reduced damage from firearms. Sir Isaac Newton's laws still held. Kinetic force still shoved the charging cavalry back. Under overwhelming firepower, the Bone Knights had to arc aside, make flanking maneuvers, and avoid frontal assaults. The troops had also prepared makeshift urban defenses, sandbags, iron barricades, barbed wire, without which they might have been overrun. Skeletons, being no more than man and horse in bone, were unnervingly light and fast, like a column of motorcycles that didn't fear bullets. The frontline soldiers reflected the firelight, sweat beading as they tensed. Fortunately, the wizards had rallied to help. Their spells, beams like colored lasers, cut through the undead ranks. The soldiers' crisscrossing fire held the front, while the wizards targeted high-level undead. Slowly, the monsters began to fall. The Bone Gate still spewed reinforcements, but the first wave had been contained. The commander ordered the artillery into position. "Bombard the Bone Gate from a kilometer out." 5 tanks rolled onto the street, flattening obstructing buildings and using direct fire against the skeleton cavalry. The shells were devastating. Even weakened, they shattered armored undead on impact. One fragment of a tattered shield landed in a sandbag, deformed by blast. A major looked closer and saw a family crest etched into it, his family's crest. A chill ran through him. Many famous knights and noble burials had been looted from these catacombs. Even in death, they kept their ranks. "A man of distinction in life, a hero in death," he muttered. How ironic to be bested again by the distant past. Far above, Ted had finished clearing the 11th Zodiac undead. Success was within reach. Softy, meanwhile, had feasted greedily. It ate its way from ceiling to floor and across the tunnel, carving stone away with each pass. In less than half an hour, it had swollen so much that it split into 2 and continued devouring on separate paths, an exponential eater. Had there not been several level 10 and up undead littered through the long tunnel, Softy might already have consumed half the structure. Those stronger monsters forced it to detour and slowed its division. In the sky, the duel had reached a white heat. Dumbledore was not as single-mindedly lethal as Ryan, but he was cunning. An old fox who avoided full-on collisions and instead tangled, skirmished, and exploited every opening. Transfiguration proved invaluable in such a chaotic aerial battle. Magic exploded in the air. Mist, white light, dry bone, and flame slammed together like 2 squadrons of fighters in a dogfight. A death mist dragon, woven from wailing faces and foul fog, bore Ryan, while the phoenix fox rode on Dumbledore's shoulder, a streak of living fire. The heavens above Paris had become a funnel of swirling gray and white, punctuated by bursts of flame and drifting ash. Time favored Dumbledore. For Ryan, though, delay was dangerous. He was effectively an enemy of the world, and the longer the fight dragged on, the worse his position became. He was thinking of how to force Dumbledore into a head-on engagement. Otherwise, he might simply unleash the corrosive pustule curse across the city below. And where was Lord Voldemort while all this unfolded? Chapter 311, Lord Voldemort, Serve Me One Last Time. He was studying the ritual to kill Ryan. Thanks to Ted, 11 of the 12 Zodiac undead had already been destroyed, and the magic circle's defenses had been reduced to their lowest. Lord Voldemort was eager to act. In the past half-month, he had learned a great deal, trailing Ryan like a dog and devouring every scrap of magical knowledge, almost as if he were back at school. But his mind remained fractured, his emotions volatile, and Ryan was unbearably insolent. Most of the time, Voldemort's thoughts turned to one thing: how to kill this monster from another world and wipe away his shame. Barty, it turned out, had learned even more. Ryan had never regarded them as real threats. He thought he could control them easily. In fact, Ryan had left contingencies, especially for Voldemort, the more powerful of the two, during his resurrection process, so he could neutralize them if necessary. At that moment, Barty slipped in through a secret passage, panting. He had taken a long detour to escape Ted and had circled around, finally finding an opening while Ted was busy clearing the circle's guardians. "Master, now's our best chance. Shall we move?" Barty asked, looking at Ryan's main body inside the magic circle and waiting for Voldemort's orders. Voldemort inclined his head. The moment he saw Ryan's consciousness leave his body, he had wanted to strike, but the magic circle was impressive. He worried that any premature move might alert Ryan or trigger another trap. He put himself in Ryan's place and imagined all the protections he might have attached to those Horcruxes. Barty's return made the timing right. "Barty," Voldemort said, smiling faintly, "break the magic circle. I will kill this monster and cleanse my shame." Barty hesitated a heartbeat, then nodded. "Yes, Master. I will complete the mission." He laid on several layers of protective spells, gathered his power, and unleashed a finite incantatem at the circle. The circle rippled, then a semi-transparent, monstrous shape of magical energy shot through Barty's body. He trembled, went blank, and when he came to, he was sprawled on the floor, nose bleeding, retching. His head felt ready to split. The thing that had rushed him was the last living Zodiac undead, the goat-headed demon, guardian of the magic circle's final lair. Just as Voldemort had suspected, the circle had a contingency. Had Ted not already cleared the other 11 monsters, Barty's spirit would have been torn to shreds. He was lucky to be alive. His spirit had been badly damaged, but not destroyed. Voldemort ignored Barty. The moment the finite incantatem broke through the circle, which by then had only 1/12 of its original effect, he fired a tremendously powerful Avada Kedavra at Ryan's main body. A green beam, thicker than an arm, struck true. Ryan's main body and the avatar in the sky screamed. Green light burst from every orifice, and then they collapsed. Timing isn't everything, place isn't everything, but the right people are. Ryan had relied on the greatest white wizard to interfere, perhaps imagining only Dumbledore could thwart him. He hadn't expected the next generation Dark Lord to seize the moment. Even if the spirit in the main body had been destroyed, Ryan's avatar could have escaped, except Dumbledore was present. Quick to seize opportunity, even when he didn't fully understand the situation, Dumbledore unleashed a golden flame that became a long dragon and engulfed Ryan's avatar, reducing flesh and lingering soul to ash. Ted blinked. "Huh? I was just fighting smaller things and about to finish the first stage of my mission, and you lot went and killed the second stage boss? One of you's the Dark Lord, and the other's a white wizard, and you actually teamed up? Master, Master, we did it! That monster who humiliated us is dead! Ha ha! Good riddance!" Barty shrieked with delirious glee, despite his dizziness. During Ryan's reign, he had treated the undead as less than living beings, beating them, cursing them, punishing them with magic. Voldemort had been forced to swallow his pride repeatedly. Now, finally, he appeared to have exacted his revenge. Voldemort smiled, pleased. "Yes, finally. This nightmare is over, and no one must ever know." He flicked his wand. A green light struck Barty. The smile hadn't left Barty's face. He hadn't even wiped the blood from his nose. Then the astonishment in his eyes faded. He slumped to the floor, pale and dead. The proud Dark Lord could not tolerate being treated like a servant, nor could he allow his humiliation to become common knowledge. Killing Ryan was not enough. The whole affair had to be kept absolutely secret. Even his loyal follower could not be spared. Standing over Barty's corpse, Voldemort murmured, "This is your final loyalty to me." Then, bowing slightly, he apparated away to begin his next great plan. The cleanup in Paris, though, stretched on for 2 weeks and was still incomplete. 3 city blocks were utterly destroyed, with damage to a dozen more. The losses were severe and wouldn't be repaired quickly. Casualties were relatively low, fewer than 200 confirmed dead, but 800 to 900 were missing. That number only accounted for those who could be tracked. Many more were homeless and uncounted. If not for British counterspell potions, the death toll would have been far higher. The official line blamed a terrorist attack, somehow using tanks or weather weapons, depending on the statement, but the public was being misled. Wizards quietly helped erase memories. The visible problem, from the public's point of view, was contained. France, having learned its lesson, moved to disinfect, seal, and backfill the entire underground network. What surprised them was how many skeletons were missing. Tens of thousands of undead had been destroyed, but the underground bone stock had dwindled to less than a fifth of what authorities expected. Millions of bones gone. Whole tunnels had inexplicably widened. Corridors that had once been too narrow for two people to walk abreast now easily fit small cars. Had the monsters cleared paths themselves? It was a mystery. Ted and his group had left. The students would not be involved in the official aftermath. Still, the French president and the Minister of Magic sent messages through intermediaries to Ted. "Mr. Epiphany is welcome in France anytime. We would be honored if you joined us. An exceptional young talent like you deserves a high position." Once they learned Ted was an orphan and appeared of Chinese descent, they were even more eager. Firearms had proven ineffectual against magical monsters. Small-caliber pistols fared worse than blades. Wizards suddenly had a much more crucial role. France wanted to recruit Ted. Back home in Britain, the wizarding community buzzed about Paris, but mentioned Ted very little. Someone had specifically ordered that unrelated individuals receive less coverage. Minister Fudge, naturally. He saw Ted as a potential successor to Dumbledore, a rising figure who might threaten the established order. While France dangled offers, Britain began to sideline him. Politicians thought in strange ways. Ted, however, was satisfied. He had gained experience, cards, softy, and Barty. Harvest a big wave. Harvest a big wave. Chapter 312, Reaping a Huge Harvest. Besides the usual planned rewards, Ted also picked up a Barty. Barty had died because he had seen Lord Voldemort humiliated, manipulated, and acting submissively before Ryan. Even after witnessing his seemingly great master acting like a dog for someone else, Barty's loyalty didn't waver. But Voldemort didn't need loyalty, he only needed his reputation. He could never allow such an embarrassing episode to be known. He had already erased his half-blood origins and his muggle father by murder and self-reinvention. How could he accept being treated like a dog? So Barty had to die. Barty had been smart, but he hadn't calculated this. Or perhaps because it involved Voldemort, he hadn't even considered it. In any case, he was dead. Ted had just finished clearing the last of the Zodiac undead, found the magic circle, and completed the mission when the system chimed. "Ding, you have completed the mission, Death of the City of Love, deep into the crypt, and received rewards, 3 580 experience points, cards, dungeon, red, flip trap, green." Then, ding, subsequent missions canceled. Subsequent missions canceled. At that moment, he also received a communication that Dumbledore had reduced an enemy to ash. Then he looked at the scene, a shattered altar, a dried corpse at its center, and Barty lying on the floor. Barty's death was distinctive. Ted had seen this pose in countless files. He had been hit by the killing curse. The killing curse in the dark arts has a double effect: forced soul separation and life force deprivation. That's why almost no one survives it. Neville had withstood it only because of the ancient magic of love's protection, sacrificial protection, that resisted life force deprivation and rebounded the soul-splitting effect. In general, if your life force is strong enough, you might resist the life force drain, giants or dragons, for example. If your spirit is tough enough, you might resist soul separation. But resisting both at once is nearly impossible. Looking at the traces on the altar, Ted reconstructed the scene. Someone must have backstabbed Ryan at a critical moment, and Barty got killed in the process. Who could have done it? Ted had his guesses, but he didn't linger. He pulled a card. Spectral Transformation. Spell card. After use, transforms a dying target into a specter under your control. Uses 1/1. Note, use with caution. If the target is too powerful, it may backfire on you after transformation. This card could turn a dying person into a ghost. Barty had been dead for several minutes, but that might not matter. His will and spirit were strong. His soul hadn't been damaged or drifted far, especially in this death-favored environment. It was worth a try. In terms of experience, Ted had truly reaped a massive haul. He'd never fought a battle this lucrative. While the little wizards explored the underground, Ted had already gained over 14,000 experience. This felt like real-world digitization, an augmented reality where killing monsters in the Paris crypts yielded far more XP than those virtual monsters in Ideal Land. Softy devoured a lot of low-level undead, 46,000 experience just from consumption. Ted had also defeated 12 mini-bosses, averaging around 1,800 XP each, adding 21,600. The mission reward was 3,580. That single sweep brought in roughly 85,000 experience points. Before this, he'd accumulated 60,000 from school, and under Nicholas Flamel, now his experience pool totaled around 140,000. Of course, the XP required for each level rose. Level 9 needed 36,000, level 10 needed 45,000, level 11 needed 55,000. Even with a 10% talent reduction, it was still a lot. But this wave could easily grant 3 consecutive levels. Ted took a long breath to steady himself. Besides experience, there were cards. Mission rewards gave him Dun Red and Flip Trap Green. Dungeon Red was a land material card. Ted had a few already and was still considering how to use them. It seemed to have special properties. Flip Trap was a spell card that created a nearby physical trap. Its advantage was that wizards tended to check for magic blind spots first, so a physical trap could catch them off guard. The monster drops were extensive too. Softy had devoured mostly low-level undead, so the drop rate for high-quality cards was low, but the sheer quantity yielded a substantial haul. Material cards, Bone Shard, Grid 34. Useful in simple ways, possibly for field fertilizer. Kun 22. Individual bones, probably crafting material. Zombie Flesh, 15. Definitely not cooking ingredients. Burial goods, 15. Odd trinkets, silver pocket watches, metal brooches, small crucifixes, miniature Christ figures, all labeled burial goods. If Ted tried selling them, people might suspect he came from the old 9 gates and call the police. Necrotic 23. A purified death magic essence. These might prove useful. Item cards, Bone Boomerang, ×3. A curved bone club that spins and slams into enemies. If it misses, it circles back and can hit again. A bone club the thickness of an arm to the head would hurt. Ted thought Neville's dog Dee would love it. Cackling Skull, 5. Conjures a floating skull that emits a terrifying cackle. It's not physically strong, but is monstrously unsettling. Dead Man's Hair Net, Comprise 1. A large net woven from dead people's hair. Anyone caught suffers lingering weakness and terror. Spell cards, Bone Wall, produces a 3-meter-long, 2-meter-high section of wall woven from many bones. It's more for separation and crowd control than impenetrable defense. Rotting Curse. Curses an enemy so that wounds suffered for a period are highly likely to become inflamed and rot, extremely vicious and often fatal in earlier centuries. Corpse Poison Ghost Hand, 1. Summons a huge magic hand of cadaverous energy that chases and grabs enemies. A bluish-black, withered hand with sharp nails, 3 or 4 meters across. Just imagining it is terrifying. Summon cards, Skeleton 7. Low-level, fragile, unarmed, ambient cannon fodder, tough 14. Slightly tougher, armed, stronger bone structure. Skeleton Warrior, 5. Around level 5, wearing crude bone armor, respectable fighters. Skeleton Knight, 2. 2 green quality knights, 1 level 7 and 1 level 8, rusty helmets, bone armor on key parts, riding bone steeds. Impressive. Zom 13. Typical level 2-3 zombies. Unfortunate, ordinary people, often still wearing t-shirts and jeans. Time 2. Covered in tattoos, lip rings, chained leather, slacker gait, amusing. Tame 3. Likely former rock musicians, still clutching electric guitars and basses. Ted was wrong to think they'd be silent. They screamed even after death. They began wailing as soon as they were summoned. The noise was unbearable. Highwayman Wombi, the funniest one, a zombie carrying both a dagger and a pistol. Ted even found his wanted poster in his pocket. This guy had been a wanted robber who hid underground to avoid the law, only to wind up in another world. That stiff posture, dagger in one hand, gun in the other, perfectly embodied the old saying, if you don't rob, you're not from France. Chapter 319, Card Fusion. And finally, the highest quality cards were the ones Ted had played himself. He'd faced opponents other teams in the game couldn't handle, and small boss undead like the 12 Zodiacs, so the drops were excellent. Dancing King Zombie, green. A summon card that calls a Dancing King Zombie who dances enthusiastically to music, granting various buffs to other undead. Put everything else aside, no one could outdance this zombie. This one had been personally transformed by Ryan. Brotherhood Skeleton Assassin, green, summons a small skeleton assassin only 1.2 meters tall. Cute and goofy in appearance, but deadly at silent movement and assassination. Its special skill, jumping from great heights onto things like haystacks or wagons without injury. Is he really from the Brotherhood? With that height and skeleton size, maybe a child apprentice who died young. Nimble Ghost, green, summons a ghost skilled in theft and lockpicking. No fighting power, but its techniques are prodigious. The system gives it a record. Was he a master thief in life? Now he's perfectly suited to his role. Then there were the cards dropped by the 12 Zodiac Undead. Pale Fire Bone Arrow, blue, an item card, a bone arrow burning with pale flames. Hitting an enemy damages their spirit. Mouth Blade, equipment, a guard shaped like a small skull with a slender saber extending from its mouth. Grants increased damage, bleeding, and unhellable wounds. A vicious weapon. False Scales, blue, spell, weakens the enemy's weakest attribute while strengthening your own. The Matthew Effect in card form. Ghost Nun, red, summon, one of only 3 red cards. The Ghost Nun's eyes are covered with white cloth. She's not bloody, but deeply unsettling. Ted hadn't yet seen her fighting style. He'd make a point of testing it. Corpse Worm Swarm, blue, summon, a massive swarm of corpse worms that devour everything edible. Blood Pool, blue, land card, a pond of foul, stagnant blood. Crying Twin Shoulder Guards, equipment, black iron pauldrons formed from the faces of crying boy and girl twins. They can emit wails and glare at enemies. Brute Bullhead, blue, equipment, a brass bullhorn helmet that allows one powerful charge, knocking back foes much heavier than the wearer. Ted was already debating whether to give it to Neville or Harry. Psychic Crystal Wall, red, spell, summons a crystal wall materialized by psychic power with extremely powerful defensive effects. Skyfish, blue, summon, 2 huge white bonefish that swim through the air and automatically pursue enemies. When Ted saw this card, he thought of those web game adverts. He decided he had to upgrade it to see whether it could evolve into a corpse kun. Underworld Bottle, blue, item, a bottle that continuously pours out underworld water. Capricorn Fruit, item, a fruit like a closed eye. It absorbs negative emotions from intelligent beings and parasitizes them into monsters. The 12 zombies yielded 3 red cards and 9 blue ones. Quite good. Ted wouldn't keep every low-level card. Fusion and upgrading were the way forward. He started fusing, using Skyfish blue as the core, plus Corpseworm Swarm blue, Corpse Poison Ghost Hand green, Bone Shard gray, 34, White Bone 2, Zombie Flesh, white 15, and Necrotic Essence green 5. He produced Sky Corpse Fish, red. The card had a vivid red border. The image showed 2 enormous, ugly corpse fish chasing each other head to tail through the air. One fish's fins were a writhing mass of corpse worms. The other's fins were like 2 spectral ghost hands flapping in the air. Sky Corpse Fish, red, summon card. Summon 2 giant devouring corpse fish to fight for you. Duration 60 minutes. Cooldown 10 hours. Floating, the corpse fish swim in the air as if in water. Undead, they are undead and carry virulent corpse poison. Devour, they can consume more living and dead matter to evolve. Corpseworm Ghost Hand, each fish has the abilities of corpse worms and ghost hands. Evaluation, ruthless eating machines. Ted clapped. Good, red card, a good start, keep going. Next, using Dancing King Zombie green as the core, plus Hippie Zombie white 2, Music Zombie white 3, Laughing Skull white 5, Bonewall white tie 3, Rotten Curse green, Burial Goods white top 17, Nimble Ghost green, and Necrotic Essence green, and Cup 5. He fused Death Rock Band blue. The card's image showed a 6 or 7 member undead band. The Dancing King stood center stage, moonwalking with a mic. One guitarist was an enormous wheel axe with a skull in the middle that acted as a guitar, sending a ring of green flame when played. The other guitarist's instrument was made of white bone, blood still dripping. The keyboard was a line of finger bones that played themselves. The drum kit was various hides and skulls, the laughing skull grinning wildly. The Master Thief Ghost appeared to be a backing vocalist. Death Rock Band, blue, summon card. Summon your Death Rock Band to perform for you and your enemies. Duration, 3 hours. Cooldown, 3 days. Dance Partner. As the Dancing King sings and dances, a large number of fan zombies are summoned. Hippie, allied units affected by the music ignore pain and become fanatical. Stage, the band can summon a high-quality bone stage that blocks enemies from disrupting the concert. Curse, for enemies who don't appreciate it, the music inflicts various curses. Appeal, any unit that dies within the concert's range joins the performance as part of the band. Evaluation, what do you call a cross-genre superstar? Ted scratched his head. The system really was thoughtful. Exactly what he needed. Again, he used Brotherhood Skeleton Assassin, green, as the core, plus Goblin Pirkey's Bone Spike, blue, dropped by an undead goblin in the Forbidden Forest incident, Pale Fire Bone Arrow, blue, Mouthblade, blue, Skeleton Knight, green 2, Skeleton Warrior, white 5, Skeleton Soldier, white 14, Skeleton, gray 27, Bone Boomerang, white 3, Dead Hairnet, green, Zombie, white 13, Highwayman Zombie, green, and Necrotic Essence, green 13, to fuse Brotherhood of Bones, red. The image showed a small hooded skeleton with twin bone spikes in its hands, accompanied by 2 skeleton knights on bone steeds in improved armor. Around them were about 13 skeletons armed with axes, daggers, barbed arrows, even firearms, hooded and looking cool. Some wore bone boomerangs, some carried bone bows, others skeleton swords, one had a dead hair net. Their configuration was actually impressive. Brotherhood of Bones, summon card. Summon members of your Brotherhood of Bones to send your enemies to hell. Duration, until the assassination target is killed or all unit members are wiped out. Cooldown, 10 hours if the target is killed, 7 days if all are wiped out. Evaluation, swords, spears, halberds, axes, battle axes, hooks, forks, tangs, lances, staffs, whips, maces, hammers, claws, crutches, meteors. Ted then focused on himself. He chose to upgrade his wizard profession by 3 levels, which required 136,000 minus 10%, 122,400 experience points. He reached wizard level 11 and received 3 attribute points, 1 to intelligence, now 10, and 2 to spirit, now 20. 20 spirit felt like a new realm. He could feel his spirit buoyant, easily sensing other people's scattered thoughts and fluctuating spirit. It was like suddenly being able to see gravity or sense electromagnetic waves. He had 3 skill points. Ted put 2 into magic, boosting his magic to level 9, which made him peerless in magic power for now. Level 9 magic also increased his magic resistance by 1 level, now magic resistance 5. The remaining point upgraded magic penetration to level 3, allowing him to ignore 3 levels of magic resistance. Penetration was crucial and hard to raise by self-study. With these improvements, he could consider intervening personally in battles of this. Anderson, is there anything uncomfortable about your new body? Ted asked. No, nothing, the puppet replied. Anderson, Ted continued, I'm not like him. We can be much more sincere. Understand? I understand, young master. I feel some restriction in my shoulder articulation. If possible, I'd like to modify it myself. Ted nodded. Of course, your comfort comes first. It's a body made for you. You need it to be easy to use. The puppet before him was an incredibly lifelike magic construct. At a glance, it was already hard to tell from a real person. Of course, to the touch, it still felt too rigid. Ted hadn't planned on mass-producing puppets. Silicone might be an option someday, but this magic puppet, fashioned in the image of a middle-aged man named Anderson, had a further truth. Anderson was actually Barty. Ted had resurrected Barty as a ghost and given him a new form. As a modern wizard, Ted had many ways to create a body, human alchemy, magic puppets, and more. Barty, no, Anderson, had fully recovered from his obsessive idol worship and abandoned his past life. Old Barty had already retired from his post at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Lord Voldemort, his old master, had disappeared. Anderson confirmed that Voldemort had resurrected and, seeing an opportunity, had attempted to ambush the arrogant Ryan. Now Anderson served young Master Ted, who had granted him new life. And with that, Anderson triggered a new main quest: seek revenge against his despicable former master. As soon as the clock struck midnight, August arrived. A chime sounded. Talent, Otherworld Knowledge activated, revealing Witcher Mutation Evolution and Sign Compendium. The compendium recorded 3 centuries of Witcher bodies evolving under mutagens, and the simplified sign magic sorcerers had developed for them. It cost 799 experience points to exchange. I didn't expect it to be another piece of Wizarding World knowledge. Ted had already obtained potion knowledge from the Witchers once. Now, he'd acquired their mutation techniques and sign lore. After exchanging for it and skimming through, he felt it was borderline red quality, much weaker than the Dragonslayer magic he'd gotten in June, but stronger than the otherworld knowledge from July. That July entry had been Astartes Monk's 19 organ modification manual, Blue, knowledge from the Warhammer 40,000 world, outlining the basic organ modifications for Space Marines. At the time, Ted had been absorbed in alchemy under Nicholas Flamel and hadn't paid it much mind. Now the implications hit him. Space Marine modifications plus Witcher mutation, there was potential for something outrageous. He felt a jolt of inspiration. Between human alchemy, arcane cultivation, organ modification, and Witcher mutagens, Professor Quirrell's legacy suddenly seemed more than merely successful. Each generation had built on the last and grown stronger. If Ted applied all these techniques together, he could create a hybrid, an enhanced combat organism, perhaps even a space marine with magic. Of course, it could go horribly wrong as well, but the horizons were suddenly much wider. His bloodline modification talent leveled up again to level 8. In this world, it was hard to think of anyone more adept at the magical modification of living organisms than Ted. This new knowledge also opened a promising direction for Lupin. Before visiting Nicholas Flamel, Ted had been helping him with his lycanthropy. He'd already completed a phase of research. Lupin learned to suppress the wildness that came after transformation, using transfiguration to moderate his post-moon frenzy. He no longer needed the Wolfsbane potion to avoid going mad. The full moon transformation itself, however, still couldn't be controlled. That was the next target. Ted had originally planned to have Lupin master his transformations entirely through transfiguration, so he could shift at will and behave rationally in any form. Failing that, he'd considered a surgical approach, removing the dangerous magical component, but that was a last resort. Both approaches were feasible for Lupin, given his aptitudes and Ted's skills, but they wouldn't generalize. Most werewolves lacked Lupin's education and talent, so transfiguration mastery or surgical alteration would only help Lupin himself. Ted and his two companions had formed a laboratory to solve werewolf problems for the wider wizarding world, not just one friend. With the new otherworld knowledge, Ted had fresh ideas. Use mutation and targeted modification to alter the conditions of the werewolf transformation and create a universal solution. Experiments became inevitable. Sirius leveraged his contacts and placed advertisements across Europe. Werewolves wanted food and lodging provided. Werewolves were a marginalized group, but far more numerous than most wizards realized, and especially common in poorer regions. Within 3 days of advertising in chaotic Eastern Europe and Southeast countries, 30 to 40 people responded, asking only whether food and lodging were really provided. The number of arrivals was overwhelming. Seeing their plight was heartbreaking. Lupin was especially moved. If not for a few friends, he could have ended up the same. Only Sirius remained from his old circle. They had to act. They decided to go public. High-profile recruitment, but low-key living arrangements. They contacted Mr. Belby, the developer of a version of the Wolfsbane potion, and also reached out to Severus Snape. Ted strongly suggested negotiating benefits for his professor. They recruited famed herbalists, transfiguration experts, and physicians from Northern and Southern Europe, then persuaded Horace Slughorn to serve as honorary head of the werewolf treatment team. When word of the team appeared in mainstream magical newspapers, it caused an uproar. The roster read like a who's who of potion makers, herbalists, transfiguration masters, and healing mages. More than a dozen prominent names. Why such a team? Why such high-profile backing? Besides generous pay, Ted had provided several research papers and entry points into new fields. The team's approach and results so far promised fame, scientific achievement, and the chance to do something meaningful for the magical community. Ambitious wizards from many countries wanted in, for money, for renown, for compassion, or for the research potential. Slughorn, short and portly and fond of fine things and useful connections, loved the idea. Ted had been appearing in the newspapers frequently. The British magical world already treated him as one of the brightest of his generation. Slughorn saw a genuine chance to be part of history. He became the team's public face, handling interviews, liaising with ministries, and calling in favors. He had enough clout that Fudge wouldn't provoke him, and he knew influential people across the International Confederation of Wizards. There were opponents. Some wizards genuinely despised werewolves and wanted them eliminated, but the team's strategy was to make allies rather than enemies. Pushing werewolves into exile or hostility would help no one. With the werewolf treatment team in place, research moved quickly. Many werewolves volunteered as test subjects. Some had been bitten young and had known nothing but wandering and squalor, and they were willing to risk death for a chance to be human again. Fathers volunteered so their children might grow up in sunlight. Ted shared non-sensitive parts of his knowledge freely with the team. Collaborating with a collection of masters multiplied their progress. Research speed increased more than tenfold. The assembled specialists were extraordinary. Every member was a leader in a field. Their lowest professional level was 7, and they digested otherworld knowledge with astonishing speed. Ted felt he'd underestimated the caliber of the world's experts. They were grateful for the new avenues his discoveries opened. Many had hit limits in existing fields and were eager to explore uncertain but promising directions. The second phase of research concluded rapidly with satisfying results. For Lupin, the werewolf problem was basically solved. He could skillfully shift between werewolf, wolf, and human forms, with his savage impulses well controlled. In effect, he had become a specialized animagus. The catch was that very few other werewolves could reach this level. Most lacked the magical education and aptitude to master such advanced transfiguration. The team's progress gave them hope, but it wasn't a universal cure. The plan for the third research phase was more ambitious. Design a potion mutation that would alter the werewolf transformation itself, so that drinking a potion could dismantle the transformation ability and solve the problem at its root. That work would require more preparation. The team agreed to pause for a month to digest their new knowledge and to reconvene for the third phase. Sirius personally oversaw the 50 or 60 werewolves who had come to them, setting up a furniture factory for them to work in and live more stably. During this period, Ted and his companions gained real practical experience and grew in many ways. Even their classmates, seemingly suddenly enlightened, advanced rapidly both in thinking and in magical skill.